Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is the, first of all, I'd like to welcome everybody for coming. This is session 2 of the Budget Subcommittee, excuse me, for City Hall, Scarborough North, and the North York, or Scarborough and the North York consultations. We are actually we're finishing up the series of meetings we have been having all across the city. As you can see, there's 2 councillors here tonight. The reason there's only 2 of the Budget Committee is we have subdivided the Budget Committee into 2 halves that are going all across the city. So the other portion of the committee, I think, is in East York tonight. And that's to give the opportunity for as many residents across the city to be able to come before us to speak. So even though there's 2 of us here, there may be a few other councillors coming, and it is being televised. And there are councillors who are... So there are a few councillors watching on TV, if you think there's not enough. And by the way, you have the budget chair and you have a former chair of budget here to listen to tonight. So we acknowledge that we are meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. And as I said, we are on YouTube and you will be taped. And if you want to be following, and if there's any councillors following, they're definitely watching, so they know they are following. It's toronto.ca/council. So we have a number of speakers who are going to be delegating tonight before us. I just want to let everyone know that you have 5 minutes to speak. There are time clocks. One is right up there to my right, to your left. Just before 5 minutes, I'll give you a little bit of a nudge to let you know you're getting close to your 5 minutes. And ask you maybe to wrap up your comments for us. And then there could potentially... And then we have an extra councillor. Councillor Layton's joining us. And then there could be potentially some questions from any 3 of us asking you questions. So on that, are there any, the other thing I have to do, are any declarations of interest? Nope, seeing none. We'll begin with the first deputation. Now I'm going to just change the order a bit. Tommy Taylor, who's number 32, has asked to go first. He's a frontline shelter worker, and he needs to get to work. So we're going to bring him up first, if that's okay, and then we'll begin with the rest of the list. So Tommy, you are the first deputant. Thank you and welcome.
Great. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me this evening. I'm late to the list. Last night, I worked an overnight shift, as I do 5 or 6 nights a week in Toronto's homeless shelters. And some of the guests asked if I could pass along some of their thoughts as Toronto's homeless, what it's like being in the shelter system and being homeless in this city. So just very briefly from last night, I've never been more afraid than I have been staying in Toronto shelters. It's like I'm invisible. It's BS, but he didn't say BS. The heat doesn't even work at one place, which is true. There is one location that's been without heat for a couple of weeks now. Nothing has changed in 25 years. Ask John Tory if he has a bed or couch I could crash on. And the gentleman who asked is very kind, so if John does, that would be fantastic. And the last one, and this is from a woman who is a residential school survivor. All my friends are dead now. And this is stuff that I hear every night. And as a frontline shelter worker, the folks at this table have put me in a position where I've had a 75-year-old man weeping in my arms because I didn't have room for him and I had to send him out. This was back in November when it got really cold and none of the emergency places have opened. And my coworkers have been going through this. I went through this last year. I worked at the St. Felix Center last year, where when we were full and had to turn away a gentleman, he overdosed and died in the KFC across the street. It's incredibly difficult, the position you've put us in. Every night I have to do this. Every night my coworkers have to do this. And then I'm a million times more lucky than the guests that I'm serving. I would do anything for these people. If you want me to beg, I'll beg on their behalf. You have to think more about what's happening upstream. The things we haven't funded in this budget are the things that could directly help these people. Poverty reduction strategy, more services for long-term care, supportive housing, just any kind of affordable housing. We have a 30% child poverty rate in the city. That's future guests. That's who that is. We're not providing enough opportunity. Before working front lines, I worked up on the 15th floor. I was policy, research, data analysis in the SPIDER and FOCUS programs that do emergency interventions. That is one of the most successful kind of programs we have running. Why isn't that being expanded? I got to do a lot of research on the mobile crisis intervention team the Toronto Police have. Those injury rates don't even exist. People aren't dying. Why isn't that program expanded? We have all the data, we do lots of research, we do lots of reports, but we have enough from frontline workers, we have enough data to know in 800 of our most intense crisis interventions in this city, top 3 risk factors every time: housing, mental health. For youth, it's either criminal involvement or social delinquency. For seniors, it's social isolation. Time and time again, these aren't changing. And the number of times that I've had to call 911 for guests in medical emergencies, the number of times that we have repeat users in this city of 911, the costs are astronomical of being a reactive society. We need to be preventive on these things. I mean, even if you don't want to get into the ethical argument, the economic argument, it just speaks for itself. Every time, I've called 911 for one gentleman 7 times this year. And that's been paramedics, that's been firefighters, sometimes there's been police involved. And that is so expensive, so expensive. And in the long term, having a supportive housing facility with some community living that has some health nurses and some mental health workers, that's so much cheaper in the long run. I'm just a little flabbergasted with the way that we're doing things, and I don't understand why the things that were left off the budget were left off. I mean, we were in the same shelter crisis in 2013. I don't know why this is a surprise. Very, very bizarre. And I feel that each year shelters and things like the poverty reduction strategy get played with this budget game where we're going to hold it back, and then when it comes through, we're going to let a little bit trickle through so that we can't be held to account for not putting it there in the first place. What's left off tells me about priorities. And just in my last little bit, I would give a shout out to some of the folks in Scarborough. A lot of concerns around road safety. The Vision Zero safety, road safety plan not being on there, and suggestions of maybe communities crowdfunding. That leaves low-income communities out in the cold to try and save their lives or make their lives safer on the road. So maybe take a look at Vision Zero. I've hit my 5 minutes. Thank you so much to Mark and Angie for letting me go first, and for you guys for shuffling the order and for hearing me out. Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
So just a quick question before you go, because you have worked here before and now you're on the outside. So serving through agencies on the outside, it now looks like the things that have been left off the budget are not our priority. But in fact, we actually go through exercises in committees and set them as priorities, and then we just don't fund them. I used the remark of a staff member earlier. We actually do, like online shoppers go shopping, we adopt strategies, we put them in our shopping cart, we just don't click on view bag and proceed to checkout. Right. And actually pay for it and get it. So we've been asking people, because a lot of people are complaining that here they are at the 11th hour trying to ask us to choose between climate and poverty. And instead, what we should be doing is actually having the conversation about priorities before we do the budget. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that the community you work with, if we could find a way to facilitate their participating and it would be ready to take part in an exercise where at the beginning of a term of office, and when we get into the next term of office, we'll do what we can in 2018, but we need to make clear what are our priorities as a community and as councillors, and do they match up with whomever is the mayor's mandate, and do that all at the beginning of a term, and then keep to those priorities and fund them.
Like a game plan.
Yeah.
And sticking to it. Yeah, well, I don't think we should have to choose between climate change and reducing poverty. We could always just increase our revenue tools, you know, bring maybe our property taxes in line, maybe something along those lines.
But if we had an exercise, rather than just take a phone poll and say, do you mind if we charge you more money? Instead, we would have an exercise where we connect the dots together. Yeah. Well,
and I think also just have to acknowledge the bad news sometimes. the system as it works right now, shelter is super expensive, but it's going to need to exist while we create these other kinds of housing. And that middle time is going to suck. But in the long term, it's going to benefit people not only on the streets, but all of us economically. We just, hey, maybe go kamikaze with a term and say, hey, I'm going to do all these things that might not make me popular, but I love Toronto just that much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Next, I will begin at the top of the list. It will be Angie Law. Okay, Angie, you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm just going to plug in. Yes. There should be paper copies that have been distributed to the committee, as well as the presentation. Do you have those?
Not yet, but I'm sure that, oh, now we do, yes.
Okay, I'm just going to start, giving you some time. So Councillor Fletcher had actually written a letter to Budget Committee asking you to support full reinstatement of pool funding for SH Armstrong Pool. Some of you may recall I was here last year. It's actually a year ago today. So I'm a community member here to talk about why funding should be reinstated, and have brought other community members behind me, along with Mark Richardson, who will be presenting next, along with users of the pool, including at least one member of the first place SH Armstrong Shark Swim Team. So, if we look back at SH Armstrong Pool from 2014 to 2016, we will see the pool numbers weren't great prior to 2017. And a survey revealed that this was because there was not relevant programming, the pool was too cold, and people just didn't know the pool existed. Well, that changed actually 1 year ago today when Penny Alexiak tweeted about our pool. And suddenly everybody became aware of SH Armstrong. This was quickly followed up by a rally that took place with the community in the middle of a blizzard, where we had people swimming in the snow, which was amazing, to show our support and our love for the pool. This generated city-wide news coverage. You can see here on the screen a Google search hit of news for SH Armstrong Pool generates about over 7,000 hits, all about the pool, which actually generated strong awareness of the pool. And this awareness resulted in a massive utilization rate, up to 90%, with most courses sold out. You see the red line is all the sold out courses of all the programming that was offered. The only thing that had a lot of space was the Bronze Star, which has a great purpose, but didn't have a lot of interest. And that was simply because people became aware that we had a pool in the neighborhood, full stop. So, City Council then asked that a working group be established to develop a plan to increase utilization of the pool, which it did by adding more relevant programming, by making some modest facility improvements, and most importantly, making the pool warmer. And that's what you see, that little graphic there is some of the advertising that we used in our social media. And that made a difference. Unfortunately, because we lost funding and then we got funding reinstated, we had no presence in the fall 2017 fund guide, which meant that we had to resort to grassroots community marketing, which wasn't the worst thing. We did outreach. We actually met with members of TCH, tenants. We went to farmers markets. We did social media. We did Facebook and Twitter. And we also met with staff at the Red Door and the Hope Shelter and local businesses. And so, because of the efforts of the working group and the tireless community members who are very, very passionate about our pool, it worked. We had 555 registrations at SH Armstrong Pool last fall, more than double any of the previous years since 2014. To fast forward to winter, which we are in right now, and we're against the same situation. We have no fund guide presence, but we did benefit from great, tremendous registration from the fall session. And what we have is, again, a phenomenal result of 401 registrations. We've actually never hit more than 200 registrations in winter, which is traditionally a lower time frame, and 401 is only 150 less in fall. So that's, again, tremendous results. And once again, our sold out splash team, the SH Armstrong Sharks, 25 strong. There were 30 last session. 25 continue to dominate the pool. And there's some pictures of the winning team members with their red ribbons. That girl in particular, has been a member of the swim team along with my son, who's behind me, for 3 years. That ladies and gentlemen, is a penny elastic in the making. Watching her compete is a joy. She swims like a fish. It is unbelievable. When you see her put on the gas, it is simply a joy to watch. Joining a for-profit competitive sports team is simply out of reach for a lot of these swimmers. Community swim teams enable these kids to hone their skills and continue swimming versus dropping out altogether because they're too young to learn to become lifeguards. So really feel that my community has demonstrated our desire and need to have a city pool. We've had the two highest registration sessions ever without the benefit of being listed in the printed fund guide and outstripping expectations even of city staff. And in fact, city staff have indicated that our pool will actually be a model moving forward for other low-use pools because of the kinds of initiatives that took place. This pool serves our whole community, not just select members, including new families that are moving into the area of a high-growth area and the vulnerable population. Our proximity to the lake means that learning to swim is a right, it's not a privilege, and city-run programs means that it's accessible to all. Back earlier last year when we had all the high water, Eastern Avenue, which is just a block south of the pool, was flooded because the lake was so high. That's how close we are to the lake.
We'll have to wrap up quickly.
Yep. And swimming has the largest wait list of any other recreation program at 35%. This statement was in the S.H. Armstrong Pool Working Group final report, and the key thing is what's printed in green, which is avoiding a service disruption to residents is desirable, and that came from the working group, which was issued by the General Manager of Parks and Recreation. So I'm asking you to reinstate program funding for S.H. Armstrong Pool on a permanent basis, and thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Sorry, I don't remember what the amount is to reinstate it because of the way we dealt with it last time. This is one of the ways that you get hit. It doesn't show up as a new and enhanced request.
Right, it's only 133,000.
That's about right.
It's
okay.
It's not even a rounding error in the total city budget.
Yeah.
But the impact it has is tremendous.
Yeah. So one of the ways that cuts happen that the people don't hear about it. You might go looking for this under things we are cutting and not be able to find it. You might think, oh, maybe it's below the line. So you go looking to new and enhanced. But there are invisible things. Someone came and asked us in under the heading of Parks and Rec last night in North York, why can't we have more community gardens? You used to always say yes, and now people are saying no when I want a community garden. And it doesn't say in here, cut to community gardens, but you see such things as an increase in supervisory span of control, which is actually taking away 7 positions for supervisors, and everyone has more to do, so they have to say no to a little program because they wouldn't have time to run it properly. And so that's sort of where S.H. Armstrong falls, isn't it? It's a little pool, and if we just keep reducing the number of people supervising parks recreation and asking each to do more, they have to say, oh, got to cut out that little program. Could everybody go 5 kilometers to the big pool? That's basically what's happening to you every single year, isn't it?
In a downtown environment is, I defy you to be a mother of a 2-year-old pushing a stroller with wet towels and bathing suits in winter at 2 kilometers. Right, or getting on TCC. You're not going to do it.
And you mentioned visiting TCHC, visiting supportive housing.
Red Door Shelter.
One of the problems for S.H. Armstrong is we keep running up against people thinking we're just talking about affluent people in the beach. That's not the case, is it?
Not at all. It's a mixed income neighborhood, and it's growing. We have a lot of new people moving into the neighborhood, still lots of mixed income families. I think it's a misperception that, Leslieville is the home of the elite. Not at all.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next is Mark Richardson.
Okay.
Again, 5 minutes.
Thank you. So Councillor Crawford, Councillor Carroll, Councillor Layton, first of all, let me wish you a Happy New Year. Let me also wish you a happy Groundhog Day, because I seem to come back here every couple of years and give you a variation of the same presentation. I was here in 2012 when, at that time, Rob Ford was looking at cutting 7 TDSB schools. We were here in 2016 when you were talking about cutting 3 pools. We were here last year when you were talking about cutting pools, and we lost on a tie, which killed me, a tie at midnight. And this year we're here asking again, budget 2018. We managed to get some sponsorship money. We found some money left over in the 2017 budget to bridge us through to the end of the year and get us through this winter period. But now we're talking about 2018. It's on page, I think, 55 of the briefing notes. The ask in this case is gross of 139.6. The net is 133.5. What does that 133,500 buy you? Well, it protects an existing capital investment. The pool was built by the taxpayers of the City of Toronto, and back in the day, it was operated by the Board of Education, back when the Board of Education had local taxation. Doesn't have that anymore. They were nice enough to the province to make sure that when Councillor Crawford's department sends out the tax bill, he collects a bunch of Ontario provincial tax as well on top of it. What else does it buy you? For $133,500, you get existing walkable local recreation facility. And it's not just for Leslieville soccer moms and people in new condos. 2 days ago, we opened a new men's shelter, which is less than 800 meters away from this location. Salvation Army facility called New Hope. It has 100 permanent, or it's working up to 100 permanent beds. It's going to be 24/7. And we have been working with the people who are doing that shelter to make sure that the people who are there also have access to recreation in our pool. Our population is growing. New census numbers, everybody. Woohoo! Population is growing and will continue to grow. Just the 7 census tracts around the pool. The pool is the star in that picture there. The census tracts between 2011 and 2016 grew by 507 residents. Those are actual numbers, so I'm not making them up. Those are the real numbers behind you. 507 residents overall. We have a lot of people aged 0 to 14. We have a lot of seniors. So we also have a lot of mixed income communities, and we're close to the lake and to the beach. So these are real people, real numbers, and we're really growing. And we always get asked the question, where can we find the money for this? What's the offset? So the ask in this case is $133,500 in the budget, which in a $10.97 billion budget is $0.000135 billion, so we're using the same numbers. The development projects just within the catchment area of this pool, this is from the AIC, the Application Information System that's run by your planning and development group. Every one of those pins is a new condo, a new townhouse development, an extension, some major change. So just within 1,500 meters of the site, we have a bunch of new developments that are either online now or coming online shortly. So total, those numbers on the wall there are 363 brand new units are coming in. We're ballparking the average value and current value assessment of those is going to be about $600,000 between the condos that are running about 5 and a bit and the townhouses which are running well over $1 million. So if you take 363 units at an average value of $600K a piece, land transfer tax alone, the city is likely to get $3.076 million as one-time money. And then ongoing, year to year, your annual property tax revenue based on the current mill rate is going to be just over $1 million a year. So you're getting $1 million a year from annual taxes. You're getting about $3 million in one-time from land transfer tax, and we're asking for $135K. It's a simple ask. I just want to leave you with this. Who is S.H. Armstrong? The pool's named after Silas Henry Armstrong. He was the first City of Toronto superintendent of playgrounds from 1913 to 1947. He developed and grew the City of Toronto recreation programs through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. In the 1930s, his account of how the city politicians were cutting the parks and playground budget was standard fare in his home. As he often said, their theory seemed simple: trees and kids don't vote, so cut there. So don't do this for me. Don't do this for the kids in my neighborhood. Don't do it for the newcomers. Vote for this In fact, vote for the whole damn expansion of parks and recreation programs at 1.1 million, I think it is,
You'll have to
in Swim
wrap
to
up.
Survive. Just, Mr. Crawford,
Yes.
to prove Mr. Armstrong wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Edward G. Again, 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Edward Shea. I am an emergency physician. I teach at U of T, and I've been living in Toronto for almost a decade. And I'd like to thank the members of the Budget Subcommittee, including Councillors Carroll, Crawford, and Layton, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm speaking on behalf of my patients who come from every ward from across Toronto. I'd like to talk about Part 2 of the Transform TO Climate Change Action Plan. So firstly, I'd like to congratulate the city for achieving its first goal in the original 2007 action plan by reducing greenhouse gases by 6% in 2012. And I further wish to congratulate the councillors for unanimously passing Part 2 of the ambitious, necessary, and achievable Transform TO plan last July. We often think of climate change as an environmental issue, but we'd be forgetting that mitigating climate change has widespread benefits for the economy, our society, and our health. To the last point, health. We often think of healthcare as a provincial issue, but the health of Torontonians is a Toronto issue. I see the effects of climate change in our city every day. Throughout the year, air pollution worsens asthma and other lung conditions. I see children who can't breathe because pollution and heat mix to produce deadly health consequences. It's a Toronto issue when a child can't attend school or their parents have to leave work to take them to the hospital. In fact, research at Toronto Western Hospital, where I work, found that exposure to pollution also increases a person's risk of heart disease. During summers, heat waves affect those with inadequate housing the most, but it impacts everyone. For instance, I saw a healthy 20-year-old man who collapsed from a heat stroke before finishing the Toronto Waterfront 10K. And finally, more extreme weather puts the safety of our residents and city infrastructure at risk. As we saw with the flooding of the Toronto Islands last year, or the heavy rainstorms in 2005 when areas of the city flooded and an airplane crashed off the runway at Pearson, or in 2013 when torrential rains caused flooding that shut down the DVP and GO stations. But taking action isn't just about preventing risks. There are numerous benefits to Transform TO. There's housing retrofits that will improve air quality, temperature control, and energy efficiency. It'll create jobs in energy and construction projects. It'll develop our workforce to attract green industries, modernize public transit and urban planning to encourage active transport and reduce chronic illness such as diabetes and heart disease, and enhance efficiency of the city by reducing waste. However, as a 2016 Toronto Public Health report points out, health benefits often take months or years to realize, so to avoid a crisis in 2030, we need to start taking action now. We're not doing this alone. Climate change actions are supported by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and efforts include other global cities in the C40 climate leadership group, such as Vancouver, New York, Sydney, and London. We need leadership from City Hall because tackling climate change spans multiple sectors. But implementing the action plan in its entirety will also have benefits in every sector. Fully funding Part 2 of the Transform TO Climate Change Action Plan will build Toronto's resilience for future generations, allow us to grow up in healthy communities, and develop jobs for the future. As a world-class city, we want to be leaders in tackling the biggest problems facing our current residents and our children. I'll end with the words of none other than Mayor John Tory. It's good for the environment, it's good for the economy, and it's the right thing to do. And I'll add that it's good for our health too. Thank you for your work.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Next, Caleb Wolcott. Welcome, Caleb. You'll have 5 minutes.
Hi, my name is Caleb. Thank you to the chair and councillors for listening to me today. I'm a high school student from Harvard Collegiate in Ward 20, and I'm here to speak today about climate change because I'm worried about my future. I've seen the predictions for the years to come, 66 days annually above 30 degrees Celsius, maximum temperatures of 44 degrees, those figures coming from a City of Toronto report. So I've seen the statistics, and we've all felt the temperatures rising with heat alerts in October this year. All this not even mentioning all the extreme weather events that have happened, the floods of Toronto Islands, the ice storm a few years ago, the floods of 2013. It's obvious that climate change is having an impact on our lives. And it's easy to feel hopeless, like there's nothing we can do in the face of all of this. And I felt that way for a long time, but recently I've joined an environmental nonprofit, my school's eco team, I'm reducing my own carbon emissions, I'm advocating here today. I'm doing what I can do to build a safe future for my generation, and all I'm asking is for you to do the same. The Transform TO plan is a good place to start when it comes to mitigating climate change in Toronto. The plan's emphasis on initiatives that benefit the community and better our everyday lives while reducing emissions stand out to me. Initiatives like green retrofits on TCHC buildings, better transit infrastructure, and community renewable energy projects. I'm asking the city to allocate $2.5 million of funding to the Transform TO plan. We can't wait another year to take action on climate change. Extreme weather is costing our city environmentally, economically, and socially. It'll only continue costing us more in the years to come if we do nothing. It makes basic financial sense to spend $2.5 million now to save billions of dollars in the future in repairs and other. And it makes sense to invest in a plan to stop climate change and to make Toronto a more equitable city. So please join me and do your part for my generation by supporting the Transform TO plan. Since I have a couple extra seconds before I end, I wanted to address Ms. Carroll's point earlier about like people fighting for crumbs, the poverty reduction strategy, Transform TO, all the different strategies that are left unfunded in this budget. There was a report recently about the revenue tools. There have been reports about all of this coming from the City of Toronto. It's not up to me to decide how you make the money. That's your job, and I expect you to do it. So, like, we can all work together. We can overcome this together. It's in your job description. You're representing us. We're asking you for Transform TO. We're asking you for poverty reduction strategy. We're asking you for the S.H. Armstrong pool and so many other things. So thank you.
Councillor Carroll, then Councillor Layton.
Quick question though. It's not my politics, but I'm asking it so that it's on the record. While it's not up to you, and you say it's up to us, it comes out of what, at the moment, because you're a high school student, I would guess your parents' pocketbooks. So the question is this: if we proceed, and whether it's this year or next year, if we say to people we've got to start building back up the base budget of this city, and it's just going to cost us all more, would you at the dining room table, when your parents are saying, damn it, my bill went up, would you turn to them and say, it's for me, it's for my future? Do you think there are enough people amongst the youth that are going to say it has to be done, you have to do this for us?
I would, yeah. I have, and I've spoken to other people.
Excellent.
90% of the people I've spoken to understand what I'm saying and say, well, fantastic. You know, lots of other people don't want to raise taxes, but I'm okay with it. Yeah. So I think there are enough people out there who are willing to chip in a little more to build our city up, as you said. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Caleb.
It's less of a question, more of just a very brief comment, because I was going to ask the question that it ultimately, if this generation, I'll say I'm kind of in the generation between, but if the generation currently in power doesn't make the difficult decisions, it's your generation that's going to have to pay for it. It's not theirs. They'll be long gone by the time the next generation has to actually pay the bill. I think that you get it, and you get it a lot more than the 45 people that are sitting in the room upstairs that have to ultimately make the decision, which is a little sad.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's really true, but I also think it's true that it'll help all of us of all ages, like as the doctor just talked about with health benefits. It's not just for the young people, but it's like for all of Toronto. So thank you very much, and thank you for your votes on this in the past.
Thank you. And I'll just have one quick question. So if we were able to, all the initiatives that you've been hearing tonight, the pool, poverty reduction, climate change, if we're able to achieve all of those items without raising taxes, you'd support that as well?
I don't see how that's possible, first of all. I feel like that's a bit of a leading question, and so I'm a bit afraid to answer that. But, you know, if there was a way that we could magically pull a couple tens of millions of dollars out of the hat, I would be very in favor of that, and I would like you to help me.
But you would be supportive if we could achieve many, if not all, of the items that you and a number of the people are here talking about without having to raise taxes or go into the reserve accounts drastically, you'd be supportive of that?
I'd be supportive if it didn't harm the people of this city.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Good for you. Yes.
Next is Dan Cameron.
Hello. My name is Dan Cameron, and I'm a resident of Ward 20. I'm here tonight to urge you to fully invest the $2.5 million required for Transform TO in this year's budget. Extreme weather is on the rise around the world, and Toronto is no exception. In 2013, Toronto experienced extreme flooding in the summer. Many residents were affected, including myself. The evening of the flood, I attempted to drive home from the office, but was unable to reach my basement apartment in Etobicoke as the police had blocked off the street. I managed to find a hotel that gave me a room despite having no power. That evening, I received word that my apartment was flooding. When I made it to my place the next day, the watermark was still visible on the sofa from where the sewer had backed up. My tub, where I had been drying my shorts from volleyball, was still coated in sewage. So you can see the sewer water there in the tub. But probably the grossest thing was opening up my fridge and seeing sewer water still floating in the crisper drawers. So you can kind of see it there, but yeah, it was really gross. While I was able to fortunately save some of my possessions, my apartment had been destroyed, and I spent the next few weeks couch surfing with friends and coworkers trying to decide what to do next. This was not a fun way to spend the summer. I definitely wasn't the only one affected on my street either, as I saw many rented trash containers on neighbors' lawns being filled with items destroyed from the sewer backup. While I wouldn't wish my experience on anyone, I felt worse for the homeowner who had to stay and deal with the cleanup, and who months later told me that the contractor she had hired had been a pain. More recently, in 2017, we've seen extreme weather affect our city again with the flooding of Toronto Islands and popular beaches such as Ashbridges Bay. Playing volleyball with my friends at Ashbridges Bay is one of my favorite summer activities. It's one of those things that makes Toronto a great place to live. Delaying the start of my volleyball season and having the islands closed to the public for months was a big disappointment, and it reminded me that we have a lot worth protecting. Besides helping to avert future costs from extreme weather events, the Transform TO plan has many benefits, like reducing poverty, improving public health, and helping our local economy by creating approximately 327,000 person-years of local employment, mostly through building retrofits. It's estimated that the 2013 flood and ice storm combined cost Southern Ontario over $1 billion, according to the Insurance Bureau of Canada. So in closing, fully investing in Transform TO is not only the morally responsible thing to do, it's also the fiscally responsible thing to do as well. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. Questions? No? That was great. Thank you. It was all about the visuals. Michaela Beater, or I think that's Beater?
That's correct, yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Dr. Michaela Beater. I'm a psychiatrist working here in Toronto. I work mostly with people with severe mental illness in the community, most of whom experience poverty and homelessness. I'm a member of Health Providers Against Poverty and also the mental health lead for an organization called Inner City Health Associates, whose physicians work all across the city in shelters. In all of my workplaces, I see daily the impact of homelessness. I have a lot of concerns about the budget, especially how the shelter and housing crisis are going to be addressed. I'd like to start by telling you a composite story pulled together from a variety of different clinical experiences. I'll call him Aaron Dukas, a middle-aged man with schizophrenia who uses drugs and who has for many years been homeless. While living on the street, he got frostbite and lost several of his toes, and I've had patients who have lost digits. Due to paranoia and a well-founded fear of assault, he often feels unsafe in shelters and instead sleeps in stairwells. On the coldest nights, he sometimes finds relief in an out of the cold, but even then, fear often drives him back onto the streets. I'm always shocked to hear how many of my patients would choose sleeping on the streets or on a grate or in the stairwell as opposed to in a shelter. He's on a lot of housing lists, but there's just not enough supportive, harm reduction-focused mental health housing in the city. In the mornings, he often comes into the office and will say, you know, can you help me find a shelter bed? And one of the workers will try to help him and often be told, sorry, there's just nothing in the system. He can go to the referral center at 129 Peter. I lie at home at night worrying about him and about others as well, whether they will survive until the morning. I recently went out with Health Providers Against Poverty to survey staff and clients at the winter respite centers. I was shocked by some of the stories we heard. The older woman who couldn't get up to go to the bathroom on her own because the mat was too low. The 81-year-old man had nowhere else to go in the world. Or most shockingly, the pregnant woman there were no beds for her to go to, so she spent the night sleeping on a chair. And I just find that shocking that this is happening in our city. The shelters are full, the streets are cold, and how can we, in a city with as many resources as we have, let this go on? We have to do better. So I'd like to offer some solutions for the city to consider. In order to meet the 90% occupancy rate for the shelters, which has been set by council, we need 1,500 new shelter beds. And I'm aware of how difficult it is to open any shelters. I understand the NIMBYism and all of that, but we just have to do it. To prevent overdose deaths, the city must train all shelter staff in recognizing and treating drug overdoses and create a low-barrier, harm reduction-friendly culture. I've also been helping out at the overdose prevention site in Moss Park, and it's just horrifying to me how many people have lost loved ones due to the overdose crisis, and I think we're taking some positive steps, but I think there's much more that needs to be done, particularly in the shelters and in the warming centers as well. In the meantime, until these shelter beds are available, the poor conditions in the winter respite centers have to be addressed. I mean, the opening of the armories and the new warming centers in the past weeks has been a really positive step forward, but we need at least 1,000 interim beds to stay open throughout the summer until the new shelter beds are open. These facilities need to adhere to shelter standards to offer showers. So we went to places where there are no showers, to places where there is no toilet paper available for people. They need to have proper sleep surfaces, and that's actually cots or beds with real mattresses. Locked storage for personal items or medications. I have patients who tell me their meds are stolen, they can't take them, they get sick, they end up in hospital. And at least 2.5 feet between sleep surfaces. In terms of housing, we need more rent geared to income housing and for TCHC units to be repaired. The city should aim to exceed its target of 1,000 new affordable rental housing units a year. And the city needs to ensure that 20% of all units in all new multifamily residential developments are permanently rent geared to income and affordable. We need more units of supportive and mental health housing, and that's what I see every day. In terms of funding, I would urge you to explore the following revenue sources. Raising the property tax. As a high income earner, I would be happy to pay more taxes. Instituting a vacant property tax, reducing tax incentives to developers, and reinstituting the vehicle registration tax. In terms of housing, we also ask that you change the definition of affordable housing to be deeply affordable. And what I mean by that is that it needs to be the amount that somebody on social assistance or old age security would actually be able to afford, rather than market rent, which is where it's at right now. So in conclusion, I just want to thank you for your time and say that when people such as Aaron Dukas get support of affordable housing, they're able to focus on recovery, being able to get better. I see that when people get housing, they get better, their health costs go down, and overall, I think that's what we need to be doing for a healthier society for everybody. This is the time to act now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
So we've had a lot of deputations on housing in the last 3 days, but there is some confusion. You're asking us to move on all fronts. There's a lot of people come and they ask for affordable housing, but that's quite different from TCHC rent geared to income. And you're asking us to do all three, really, not even just all two, social housing, but also supportive housing for those who are not going to succeed, even if we gave them a house without real social supports.
I absolutely agree. I mean, we need all of those things. And in addition, I would say, in the meantime, we also need to be improving both the interim shelters, well, the shelters, and then these interim spaces, because I see people needing a whole variety of options. And I think before I started doing this work, I had no idea how many people there were who are severely ill, and there's just no way to get them into housing, often because of their substance use or because of their mental health. And I mean, that's the subpopulation I work with. I think the affordable housing is for the much broader population.
And the Armory is a 2-week solution, I think, but you're saying it really needs to be there into the summer.
I mean, I think we need 1,000 spaces somewhere. I don't know what the best location is. I think certainly the Armories is an option. I went by the Regent Park Center today, and I mean, it looked really clean. There was the cots out there. It looked nice. But my worry is, I mean, we've seen close to 700 people a night using these interim spaces. Yeah. Where are they usually? I mean, they're on grates, they're on in coffee shops, they're on the streets, they're in ravines, in places where when it gets this cold, I mean, it's like this bandage is ripped away and we see what's actually going on.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Michaela. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Sarah Lydia Griffiths.
All right, here comes another deputation on housing. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here before you today. So my name is Dr. Sarah Griffiths. I'm also with the organization Healthcare Providers Against Poverty, and I also work with people experiencing homelessness and poverty in Toronto. I'm here to advocate for the same things as Dr. Beater previously mentioned, the creation of 1,500 new shelter beds, as well as the immediate improvement of the conditions within the city's winter respite centers. I know this has been a hot topic in the press. There's been a lot of advocacy around this. And what I'd like to add to the discussion are some of the findings of a recent survey alluded to by Dr. Beater that we organized regarding the conditions in the warming shelters. I do not need to tell you that Toronto's shelter system is in crisis. I do not need to tell you that the city's shelter programs have not kept pace with the growing number of people experiencing homelessness and that shelters are at capacity. This winter, as many as 680 people a night were unable to access a shelter bed and instead slept on mats on floors and chairs in overcrowded winter respite centers and out of the cold programs. When these programs close in the spring, shelters are still going to be at capacity and many of these people will have nowhere to go. As healthcare providers, we're seeing daily the impacts that homelessness and insufficient access to shelter are having on our clients' health, and we become increasingly concerned about the conditions within the winter respite programs and drop-ins. So in order to address this past December, a group from our organization visited all 6 of Toronto's winter respite centers, as well as Toronto's 2 24-hour women drop-ins. At each of the site, we spoke to service users and staff, and we observed and recorded the facilities and the conditions. What we saw was that none of the facilities met the city's own shelter standards, nor the standards set by the United Nations Refugee Agency Handbook for Emergencies. We interviewed a total of 35 clients. Nearly all spoke at length about the detrimental health effects of these inadequate conditions. To paint a picture, The sleeping arrangements in all but one facility consist of mats on floors lined up in rows, one next to each other with no physical separation. Several facilities do not have a designated sleeping area, but transform common spaces into sleeping areas at night, and often have clients sleeping in empty chairs. The Toronto City Shelter Standards mandate a minimum of 3.5 meters squared of personal space per client in sleeping areas to decrease the transmission of communicable diseases and conflict. Yet clients are not provided with this minimum. As one client insightfully remarked, people get more and more violent as it gets more crowded. While the city standards state each client should be provided with a minimum of 2 sheets, 1 blanket, 1 pillow, 1 pillowcase, and 1 towel, none of the centers were able to meet this requirement. Only one facility provided a secure place for clients to store belongings, and clients reported sleeping with one eye open due to fear of theft. Often important belongings like identification and medication go missing. None of the facilities meets the city's shelter standards of providing 1 toilet for every 15 clients, and of the 8 facilities, just 3 have a single shower. It is no wonder that in these conditions, almost all clients reported poor or very poor quality sleep with an average of just 4 hours of sleep per night. Overcrowding, poor privacy, poor sanitary conditions, and poor sleeping conditions are contributing to exhaustion, high levels of stress, violence, and illness. I spoke to an elderly woman with severe arthritis who recently lost her housing, was denied a shelter bed, and didn't know how she was going to manage sleeping on the floor or on a chair that night. For me, it's impossible to not see how these conditions are going to negatively impact her health. The drop-ins are a crucial service. They are staffed by workers and volunteers doing their best in an underfunded system, but what we saw is that they are a grossly inadequate substitute for low-barrier shelters. I would like to echo Dr. Beater's request and the requests of healthcare providers against poverty. In order to bring occupancy in shelters to under 90% and get clients in beds, we urge the city to open at least 1,500 beds in new facilities across the city and within the downtown core, and to include beds that are low barrier, support harm reduction, are safe for Indigenous, racialized, and LGBTQ people, and are able to accommodate couples, families, and pets. We did our survey prior to the opening of the Regent Park Warming Center, the Moss Park Armory, and the Better Life Center, and we commend the city for this step and the proposed opening of the George Street site. We are in the process of surveying these sites, and we have heard that they are an improvement, but we need 1,000 spaces in facilities like these that comply with city standards, and they must stay open throughout the spring and the summer until more permanent shelter beds can be open. We have compiled the detailed results of our survey, as well as further recommendations in a report that we are intending to release shortly. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Next is Megan Matz.
Hi there, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Megan Matz, and I'm a student in engineering at the University of Toronto. And I'm here to talk in support of fully funding the Transform TO Climate Action Plan. Though the plan was passed unanimously by Council in July of 2017, the 2018 budget does not provide funding to implement the plan's initiatives. Full funding is required in order to meet the plan's goal of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. Failing to allot funding towards this program now is very likely to cost the city more in the long run due to increasing severity and frequency of natural disasters. The Government of Canada anticipates climate change to impact our region in the form of hotter summers, more storms, and heavy rain events, which of course lead to flooding. These types of severe weather events are familiar to us in Toronto. This past spring, we experienced severe rain, causing the flooding of the islands. This caused severe upheaval in the lives of the residents. In 2013, we experienced both flooding and an ice storm, which together cost the city $171 million in repairs. This, however, was only how much the disasters cost the city directly. According to the Insurance Bureau of Canada, the total cost of the damage from these two events was $1.3 billion. Research shows that severe weather disproportionately affects the poor, the disadvantaged, the elderly, and the chronically ill. These individuals are directly impacted by extreme weather through extreme heat and low air quality. They are also indirectly impacted through side effects such as displacement from their homes, transit disruption, power outages, and food and waterborne illnesses. The sign of a sustainable city is its ability to not only meet the needs of its current citizens, but also to look ahead and anticipate the needs of its future growing population. Delaying funding or underfunding the Transform TO Climate Action Plan will cost the city not only more money in the long run, but also the lives of Torontonians. By funding the plan, councillors will be fulfilling their economic and social responsibility to our city. They will be allowing our future of Toronto to be livable and prosperous, not only for well-off citizens, but also for those who face economic and social disadvantages. I encourage our city councillors to uphold the commitment they made when passing the plan and fully fund Transform TO. Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Next is Vincent Puhaka.
Thank you. I think I'm audible here. So a lot of my previous deputants here have spoken very movingly about some, I guess, more specific issues relating to the budget. I want to take a bit of a different tack, if you will, and actually talk a little bit today about freedom. So we do hear a lot about freedom come budget time, mostly freedom of the negative freedom. So freedom from taxes, freedom from spending, generally a critical view of the role that government of all levels, federal, provincial, and municipal, can play in our lives. Now, the problem with this is it presents that negative view of society and the city. A view that, Councillor Crawford, yourself, you said that it's good news that taxes and spending are low in this budget. Now, this is a view that says that beggaring the things we hold in common and use together is positive. So the alternative to this, what I refer to as a bit of a depressing worldview, is a different kind of freedom. I would say, I would call it the freedom to, or positive freedom. So what do I mean by this? I'm conceiving of government spending, in this case, local government spending, municipal spending, as a liberatory or liberating tool, as opposed to being a burden. So I want to give a personal example of what this means for me. I've always used the TTC as my primary method of getting around the city. Some of you may have seen me depute here before on transit issues. Now, I do drive. However, when I was a student, I didn't have much money to do so. And as a young professional, I'm very disinclined to spend my life sitting in parking lots. So thus, money spent on transit operations is not a burden for me. It's liberating. When we talk about keeping spending low, maybe I'd get a few more dollars in my pocket, but I put up then with crowded transit vehicles, longer headways, less service, deferred maintenance, the list goes on and on. That's bad enough for someone like me who can make a choice to rely on transit. What about those who have no other choice and no other option? Now, council's demonstrated that you do understand the needs of these users, for example, by endorsing the 2-hour transfer. But there's no funding for this or other approved plans. Moving beyond young people like myself who may want to drive less and low-income folks, there are a whole demographic of people who would drive less if transit service was there for them. We do have a ridership growth strategy released soon by the TTC. That will need to be funded. And of course, this has knock-on effects for the city as a whole. For example, less land dedicated to parking lots, less traffic, et cetera, et cetera. Where was I? And all of this is about transit, as I've said. Of course, just think about how many more positive freedom we can have in this city. Again, freedom to, as opposed to freedom from. There would be in Toronto if we, for example, funded, in addition, the poverty reduction strategy, if we funded Transform TO. So I'm taking a bit of a meta concept here, as having freedom to from government spending. Now, one of the main issues I think, and I see why this has happened, is fear. I think there's fear of a bit of an anti-tax backlash if we do raise revenues, if we seek out more diverse revenues. But why? You know, we've opened a new, to take transit, we've opened a new subway line. We've invested in initiatives like the King Street pilot. These are all very popular. So people are clearly happy to spend money if it's on something that they already want. So it's possible, I think, to have an expansionary fiscal policy if it's sold to the public properly. So I'll give you another example. Let's look at south of the border, if we can ignore Donald Trump for a second, if that's even possible. Municipal governments in the United States are increasingly moving towards expansionary fiscal policies. So-called progressive candidates are winning elections even in the deep south on these kind of policies. Look at Birmingham. Alabama has a very progressive mayor who wants to spend more money. This is very possible in Toronto. So I would argue it's even becoming popular to spend and to tax, so long as citizens know what that tax is for and if they're inspired by it. My main interest here, obviously, is transit. Again, my volunteer work is typically with transit organizations. But I want to call today for an end in general to austerity budgeting and more diverse revenue sources and higher revenue sources. Again, I am a young professional. I pay taxes. I understand no one wants to spend money. But I say again, if the money being spent is tied to specific initiative, if a tax increase is tied to specific initiatives and it's sold properly, if you will, I think this is a very, very possible thing to do this budget cycle and budget cycles to come. So
you have to wrap up.
Okay, and this is what we need for transit, for social housing, and the building blocks of a healthy, vibrant city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yes, I just want to ask Vincent a question, because you said you're a driver, but you're here primarily about transit, because you are also a transit rider and enthusiast. You mentioned the 2-hour time-based transfer, and there's been a lot of Twitter chat and chat about it the last couple of days. It seems to have been forgotten, though. We've been talking about the social benefit of it, and then there was the argument about, one of my colleagues unfortunately said it was for the Bay Streeter going for a $150 lunch up in Yorkville, and that all ensued. It's kind of been forgotten that the actual suggestion, it's actually part of a ridership growth strategy that's unfolding at the TTC. While there's a cost to it, it's designed to attract people to become Presto users. It's 2-hour time-based transfer with Presto. And for every person who becomes a Presto rider, we save money, because we're not hiring 7 people to march around carrying the tokens to and fro. Exactly. So if that 2-hour time-based transfer was there, would that change your use of transit? Would there be times when you said, I got to take the car because I've got stops to make? With the 2-hour time-based transfer, you're going to say, then I can still do all of this on transit.
Well, I think that's the point. So, of course, the derogatory comment about the Bay Streeter going for lunch. Well, you know what? I'd rather him be on transit, him or her be on transit, rather than taking a cab or driving their own car.
There you go.
And second of all, if we make transit, again, this is back to my point of liberation. If we make transit about freedom, something like a 2-hour transfer, people have a Presto card, suddenly transit becomes, this is something that liberates me. This is something that means I can leave the car for my spouse or my child. I can just take the bus to go somewhere. So that proverbial Bay Streeter, I'd rather have them on transit.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick, not done. Sorry. So, as I said in my last question to the other deputy, if we were able to achieve in this budget the $132,000 or $133 for RH Armstrong, $2.5 million for Transform TO, the full poverty reduction plan that's recommended, the arts $2 million, the 2-hour transfer for TTC, the fare pass. If we were able to do that, but at the same time keep taxes low and affordable, would that be good news?
I think it would be if it was possible. So the question is not so much that raising taxes in and of themselves is a good thing. That's not my argument. Of course, if we can keep taxes at a same rate and increase service, why not? It's just, I'm not sure where that's been demonstrated, where that's actually happened, without cutting elsewhere.
Thank you.
That's all?
That's it, yep. Nope.
Thank you.
Stay tuned, as I said. Next is Sayak Snedden Gosal, I believe is the pronunciation, I'm hoping. Sayak. Oh, they're all, okay, these are all from Young People's Theatre. Yeah, you can all come together. Just introduce yourself, of course, before you start, and welcome.
Hi, I'm Shy Oaks, Nedden Goshal. I know the spelling's not at all how it's pronounced.
Or how I
like
pronounce
Saoirse
it.
Ronan. Go ahead.
So, the arts is the way that I, and I'm sure a lot of other people, express myself. And having good access to the arts is important so that I have the resources and models, and everyone else does as well, to help everyone conduct and communicate themselves to each other, and just kind of to help them express themselves. And when I can see other people doing that, it makes me feel less alone. And in my opinion, the arts are really just a form of creativity, communication, and expression. And as someone who loves both being involved and experiencing the arts, having access to the abundance of arts that we do have in Toronto is extremely important. And I'm not just someone who likes the arts and the experience it offers all citizens and the young people of Toronto. I'm also a participant of the arts. So for the past 3 seasons, I've had the amazing opportunity of participating in Young People's Theatre's fantastic Everyone's a Critic Day. And after a matinee performance, I would have the opportunity to talk to young people in the YPT audience about writing reviews and respond to questions about the play that they just saw or the review for the play that they just saw. And writing reviews is one of my favorite things to do, so I have a strong passion for talking about it. And I've been a youth critic for a performing arts e-magazine on Society.com for 4 years, and more recently on my very own YouTube channel. And besides this, I take drama, music, and dance classes and perform in concerts and recitals every year. And I'm a student in the drama program at the Claude Watson Arts Program at Earl Hague Secondary School. And if I didn't have or participate in all of this, then I would not feel at home mentally or emotionally because of so many of the different art forms all around me. I feel happy and at home in Toronto.
Thank you. Next.
Hello, my name is Nyla, and I'm here to speak on behalf of the youth of Young People's Theatre. When I was asked to speak, I was asked this question: what is it about the arts in Toronto that makes you feel at home? My answer to this is that although I do not have the same beliefs or culture as other citizens, the arts is a universal language that brings us together and creates a sense of community. The arts have always had a significant role in my life. I took drama classes for 3 years, and this is my 2nd year in partaking in a playwriting class. I look forward to every class knowing that the classroom is a space where I can be myself while having fun. I leave every class feeling energized and full of ideas. 4 times more tourists visit Toronto for art rather than sports. This really speaks about Toronto's connection with the arts, which gives us more the reason to keep it alive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mercedes, and I'd be a different person if I hadn't been involved in the arts. The arts have provided me and many others with a safe and comfortable space. And I grew up in theater programs, and specifically YPT. I've spent half my life there, and it's something that I love and I'm proud of. And I associate all the things that theater and YPT encompass, such as learning and growing, challenging yourself and each other, and creating wonderful ideas. And I associate them with Toronto, with my city, with our city. A city that's growing and changing all the time. At every step, art keeps up, art changes, it adapts, it leads, it pushes and stretches us. It makes us feel at home in our city, and art lets us show our intelligence, our imagination, insights, visions, and diversity, which our city is well known for. And it's always growing and changing, just like Toronto. Art is like another world we get to explore every day right here in Toronto, one everyone can participate in, no matter age, race, culture, gender. And that's why it's so important for the City Council to allot the last $2 million necessary for the arts funding for $25 a person.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carroll has a question.
Yeah, so you're all artists, but you all look very, very nervous to come and talk to us today. So I ask you this, the chair of the budget is saying, what if we can solve this? What if we find a way? If we find a way, because we have some surprise one-time revenue, maybe our investments pay off a little more this year and we can plug the hole and fund this year, but it's not ongoing funding and you have to come back next year and every year for the next 7 years like you do for SH Armstrong Pool. Is that the solution you're looking for, or would you like us to find a way to fund it so you never have to come back here and ask us for the same $2 million over and over again every year? You'd prefer the former, right? You'd prefer tonight's deputation to sustainably fund the arts, so you don't have to keep coming back and begging every year.
Certainly be preferable.
Yeah.
You bet. Okay. Thanks, because then we won't have to ever make you nervous ever again.
But you did well. You did very well. Thank you. Next is Julie Anas.
Hi there. My name is Julie. I'm with Ward 6, and I am a client from Women's Habitat. That's an agency that works with abused women and children. I'm here to talk to you about just a couple of different things that I've been noticing. I'm noticing that there's young adults between 25 to 30 that are moving back home. They're moving back home. They've moved out, but they're moving back home. And I don't think that's good. I mean, I left at 14, I never went back home. That was that, you're gone, history. But unfortunately, in this day and age, in 2018, we have more young adults between the ages of 25 to 30 coming back home. I can't even believe it. I'm just like, and it's hard for them because I think some of them don't have the proper skills to hold on to a job. When they get a job, they don't have the proper skills to maintain that job. So then they have to quit the job. And they don't make enough money in the job because some jobs they do go to are jobs that are bottom of the pit jobs. Jobs that they have to do whether they like it or not. You want to make the money, then this is what you're going to do. And this isn't the job that they prefer because they went to school or they went to college or university or whatever. And also, a lot has to do with TTC. They can't afford the TTC. They can't afford, sometimes they have a place to go, but they don't have the TTC to go there. And there's this thing that's called Presto. There was supposed to be a fare pass, it's called. I was wondering what's going on with that. Does anybody know? Like what's happening? You know, they said they're going to look into it. They're going to put funding into it. I even heard they might put funding into it in a matter of 10 years. That's a long time. I think if we got funding a little bit sooner than that, things would partially look good, you know? So, no, I wanted to also know what's stopping them? What's stopping them from doing this? Like, you speak of it, but nothing's happening. Like, what's stopping you? That's my main question. What happens when you go in the room and you sit there and you talk about all this stuff? It's talked about, but nothing's done. Like, it came in, but it never went out. You know, like, I don't understand that. My kid comes in, says, "Mommy, I'm hungry, I need cereal." Mommy gets in, gets a box of cereal, give him cereal. That's what the child said, "I'm hungry." So we talked about this Presto fare card, and that's what we've done, but we've talked about it, but nothing's been done. So, and that's hard because a lot of these people can't afford proper housing. A lot of them make minimal wages, and they have to live in you know, not in the best housing. And like I said, half of them are coming back home, which a lot of parents, when their child is 30, are ready to be, the parent themselves are ready to be on their own. You know, it's like reverse psychology. So now the parent is ready to be on their own. The child is coming back going, I need to come back home because I can't make it out in the real world. You know, I never had that joy, that luxury to say, I want to come back home. Can I come back home? That's not the way it worked. But there are a lot of them out there that do have that luxury, and they do have to come back home and live with their parents because they can't afford the housing, they can't afford to go to work, they can't afford to keep the jobs. They get jobs, they go to school, they don't get the right schooling. The right schooling they don't get the right job for the schooling that they've been trained for. They're flipping burgers at McDonald's. So, you know, it's a cycle, yeah. Like, I mean, I come from a hard walk of life, so I'm a walker and I'm a talker. I'm not just sitting here, I'm not just a little prop. I come from the streets. I've worked hard to where I got to. I worked hard. But to see the next generation, what's going on with them, because our generation didn't have to do that. We didn't have to go through that. We were told, that's the way it is, see you later. But now we're parents and we have to say, we don't say see you later. We say come back in because that's the way it is. And yeah, you're the walker and talkers. Youth counselors are the walkers and talkers of this business. You do a lot of walking and you do a lot of talking.
You'll have to wrap up, please.
So my main question is what's happening with Presto, and you know, once that starts, the ball starts going, things start happening, people can afford to go somewhere, they can afford to go to work, they can afford to get a job, they can afford to pay the rent, they can move forward as opposed to going backward, because it's just a ripple effect. All of this is a ripple effect, what you're hearing here today. Do you know what, when you're hearing today? It all comes back. It's a cycle. It doesn't stop, it doesn't revert. Only you can make it revert.
Thank you. Thank you for your deputation.
I don't know what that means. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Stella Pascal, or Pascal. Stella Pascal. Patricia Warwick. We have
two people.
two Patricias.
Yes, my name is Angela Oriana Schwam, this is Patricia Warwick, and we are, together we are making this deputation.
Okay, great.
And, thank you very much to the councillors and to the Budget Subcommittee for this opportunity. We would like to talk about the funding for Transform TO. In Paris, Canada signed an agreement to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees, and to pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Now, it's relatively easy for governments to support global targets while doing little in practice, or to think that it is the responsibility of other jurisdictions, such as provincial or federal governments. But scientists are reporting that impacts from climate change are occurring even more rapidly than originally anticipated. We can no longer afford to take a gradualist or piecemeal approach to the problem. Cities generate approximately 80% of global emissions. By 2050, cities will be home to 2/3 of the world's population. And it is in cities where we have the potential to make the most significant contribution in the effort to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We all have to do our share. Toronto's share of the global population is 0.03%. Hence, we should be making a corresponding amount of the effort towards the target. Now, 0.03 doesn't sound like a lot, But if you look at what we emit annually, we emit 20 megatons, which represents 0.05 of the global emissions, which is much more than our fair share. In July 2017, this council voted unanimously to approve the Transform TO plan while not allocating adequate resources to meet it, and if implemented as such, will jeopardize the overall success of the plan, as many portions of it are interrelated. Many other deputants have already made this case. Our concern is that the Transform TO targets are not nearly ambitious enough to meet our equitable share of the promise we made in Paris. There is a finite amount of carbon that can be emitted, which corresponds to a given temperature increase. The faster we add greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, the faster we use up this budget. We have already used up for a likely chance of keeping temperatures below 1.5 degrees, and if we want to keep total emissions to well under 2 degrees, the 2-degree budget, we will need to get to net zero emissions as soon as possible. Net zeros, this is a net amount because it takes in carbon from emissions from carbon sinks as well as carbon sources. Transform TO plan has many excellent initiatives. The target of 65 by 2030, however, is not ambitious enough for us to contribute our fair share towards keeping global temperatures, the increase in global temperatures close to 1.5 degrees or even to the well below 2 degrees. So we have a slide here showing the various emission reduction targets. Okay, we'll start with the yellow. This is where we are right now. These are Toronto's actual emissions between 1990 and 2013. Sorry, the color didn't come through, but that's the first one. Patricia will point to it. The next one is what our target should be to keep global temperature increases close to 1.5 degrees, and you'll see on the chart we're almost there if we're not there already. Okay, the next target is in order to keep let's go with the Transform TO targets. They're 30%, you can sort of see on the chart, it's plotted 30% by 2020, 65% by 2030, and 80% by 2050. And you'll notice how while it's on the trajectory getting to 65 by 2030, if it were to continue along that trajectory, it would hit 2 degrees, or net zero, at about 2040. But because you have the commitment is 80% by 2050, that's why it veers off far to the right. I can't really see that when we get to that point in time, they would continue with that target. But, okay.
I'll have to wrap up.
Oh, have we used up the time?
Yes.
Okay, well, so can I just say a few, what we're asking is that at the very least, the city can do is to approve the Transform TO budget in its entirety immediately. To withhold funds to meet even these modest targets would make it nearly impossible for us to meet our Paris commitments. Therefore, the city should approve the funding for Transform TO and thereafter move quickly to adjust the targets to net zero. We think that to keep them well below 2040, we would need to hit net zero by 2025.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll has questions?
So you're very familiar in using the visuals from the Transform TO plan. The $2.5 million that has to go in is to catch up both years, the year in which the plan was adopted and the 2018 year's work. If we don't do the work in years 1 and 2, then it jeopardizes the work in 3, 4, and 5, and pretty soon we can't possibly make our 2050 target. So the $2.5 million is about hiring the initial staff to then fan out the whole plan. So if we come forward, if we find a way to fund them, you don't want that funding to be just, we found some magic dollars and we can fund them for this year. you want us to find a sustainable solution
Yes.
so that we're setting up a team that can continue to work on Transform TO year after year after year in our base budget. That's what you're looking for, am I right?
You need to fund the 2.5 at a minimum, and then once the plan is proceeding and the work is being done, then move quickly to readjust the targets, because it's still not...
Right. If the team's not sustainable, the plan's not sustainable, am I right? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tina Shapiro.
Good evening, Chair, City Councillors, and general public. My name is Tina Shapiro, and I am from Sistering, a social service agency that serves marginalized, homeless, and precariously housed women, as well as from the Fair Fare Coalition, a campaign of TTC riders. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today, and Sistering strongly supports the full implementation of the poverty reduction strategy, which includes affordable transit. So Council has adopted a number of strategies and made promises that would make the city more inclusive. But these promises are empty when they are made without the commitment to fund and follow through on achieving their targets. And it has severe impacts on the women we serve. Based on the city's equity, diversity, and human rights equity lens, Sistering would like to add a gender lens to the analysis of funding affordable TTC. There are safety concerns for low-income women who can't afford transit. A woman may be in an unsafe situation on the street or fleeing domestic violence, but not be able to afford TTC to get somewhere that is safe for her and perhaps her children. Affordable transit would help alleviate this barrier and gender inequity. At its very core, a gender equity lens acknowledges and analyzes the underlying root causes of disparities that different groups of people face based on their social, cultural, and economic identities. It recognizes that both revenues and expenditures of TTC and city budgets impact women in particular ways, and that these effects are compounded when gender intersects with other identities that can include Aboriginal identity, race, culture, creed, language, citizenship, amount and source of income, disability, sexual identity, age, geographic location in the city, among others. The goal of a gender equity lens is to redress and remedy these systemic disparities through fair taxation and fair allocations of public resources. Increased fees for services including transportation and childcare make it difficult and in many cases impossible for women to access the job market. This budget, which is dangerously balanced on draws from reserves, an inflated housing market, and an inflationary property tax increase, is not sustainable and does not address the root causes of systemic poverty and discrimination. We want the city to choose a budget that leverages a range of revenue tools, invest significantly in areas of transit, housing, childcare, recreation, and poverty reduction, and for these decisions to be made through a true intersectional gender budgeting process. We would like to see the full implementation of the Fair Fare pass immediately, but further, in the name of social justice for women and all low-income Torontonians who can't afford TTC to get to job interviews, doctor appointments, food banks, social services, and more, and are sometimes having to choose between TTC fare and transit, even one way, or food. We are asking for free transit for those on OW and ODSP and a $50 Metro Pass for those below the LICO. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Thank you very much. I just have a question about one part of your presentation about how the budget's being balanced, because we've had several questions about if we could put back in all of this stuff, which like the fair fare, the transform TO, all the stuff that the city's announced. But we could do it without raising the property tax rate. Would that be a good thing? Like I'm arguing that I think we should put them back in. It's how we balance the budget after that point in time. And you touched on a point of sustainability. Do you think it's a good idea if we're to put all these things back in, if we just figure out kind of a one-year solution where we take money from a reserve and to pay for these things, but ultimately it's Caleb and the young people from Young People's Theatre that came, that it's going to be their responsibility to pay for it down the road? Do you think that that's a good approach to budgeting?
Personally, I think sustainable is a better way to go. I think we do need to look at these immediate needs and immediate promises. So the Fair Fare Pass was already supposed to be implemented. And that's just a first step for what we're asking for.
So put the stuff in and figure out a way to fund it, but sustainable, responsible budgeting would probably be a more prudent approach.
Yes.
Dare I say more conservative approach to city financing. Thank you.
Can I just put that another way? I think what Councillor Layton is saying is, you don't want us to implement a fair fare pass for 12 months and then take them all back from the citizens, do you?
No. Is that what
Yes.
you're saying?
That's really what he's saying. If we use one-time money, we can say, here, everyone, here's your Presto card and a low-income fare pass. Next year, we'll say, we'll have to take that back now, or we'll have to come up with 4.8 million and the cumulative double amount. So you'll have to give them back now. You don't want that kind of fix to our budget.
No, we don't.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I guess I could repeat my comments or questions and add sustainable to the end of that, and I guess we'd all agree, right? Because I'm looking at sustainable too. So. See, we can't agree, can't we? Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
Next is Melissa Goldstein.
Good evening. I'm here to speak to you on behalf of Housing Action Now, a coalition of residents and community organizations that advocates for safe, decent, and affordable housing for all Torontonians. The following is our feedback regarding the City of Toronto 2018 budget. I'm here once again to remind you about the affordable housing and homelessness crises Toronto is experiencing and to ask you to do something about them, to walk the walk instead of just talking the talk. In 2017, 225 units of affordable housing were built. That's 20% of the city's target of 1,000 units per year. And every night in 2017, over 5,000 people slept in homeless shelters and on mats on the floor. In 2018, Shelter Support and Housing is anticipating that the wait list for affordable housing will grow by an additional 2,000 households, while the Affordable Housing Office's target for 2018 is the completion of 816 affordable housing units. The homelessness crisis is so great that Shelter Support and Housing projects no improvement in shelter occupancy levels despite current plans for new beds. In other words, city staff anticipate that if this budget is approved as is, in 2018, 3 times as many households will be added to the affordable housing waitlist as units of new affordable housing will be added to our housing supply, and the numbers of homeless will continue to increase. So as we near the end of your term on council, after 4 years when affordable housing was supposedly a priority, the affordable housing crisis is still a crisis and the situation continues to get worse. Given the situation I just described, to say that the current shelter crisis we're experiencing is anything but a direct result of our affordable housing crisis is ridiculous. Yes, we need better mental health services and more supportive housing. Yes, we need the federal government to stop financially abandoning refugees who haven't landed on their feet after a year in this country. And yes, we need both levels of government to help us finance social housing. But the fact is that poor people in this city, regardless of why they're poor, cannot find affordable places to live and end up homeless. And once they become homeless, they are faced without adequate services to support them. What this budget is lacking, just like the last 3 budgets of this council, is the funding necessary to meaningfully address our affordable housing crisis and the resultant homelessness crisis. What we need in the 2018 budget is this: A commitment to create a minimum of 1,000 additional shelter spaces right now, spaces that conform to the city's shelter standards and will be able to accommodate all of those currently sleeping on mats on floors. A commitment to opening respite spaces to accommodate the current need if not satisfied by the shelter system, plus capacity for possible emergencies and unanticipated increases in need. Funding to support a serious expansion of efforts to build new affordable housing. We need to be exceeding our targets when we're not even coming close to meeting them. Funding for the 2018 Poverty Reduction Work Plan is a way to prevent increasing homelessness. That includes funding the TCHC Tenants First Implementation Plan. Funding for the Moss Park Overdose Prevention Site. We should not be relying on volunteers and donations to provide this critically necessary public service. The city should fund its portion of the Toronto Urban Health Fund to access funding for it. An increase in community partnership and investment program funding so that nonprofits can comply with the minimum wage increase for their staff without putting their programs and services in jeopardy. As Matt Elliott noted this week, the real cause of our shelter crisis is a political culture at City Hall that looks at stories of vulnerable people being unable to find safe shelter, that examines numbers showing the city's nightly failure in meeting its 90% shelter occupancy target, and says, you know, our real priority is keeping property taxes low. He noted that the solution to the shelter crisis is in the city's budget. A real commitment to affordable housing and addressing homelessness involves being proactive and anticipating the need and increasing spending on housing services, social supports, and long-term affordable housing to build capacity. A municipal government devoted to a long-term fix and to supporting vulnerable people would make those investments before the need reached a breaking point. It's also a failure in good fiscal management since it costs us less to prevent problems and be proactive than to respond retroactively or to emergencies. It's a failure in good governance. You can't claim to be good managers of the city's finances if you go through these budget exercises every year, only to end up scrambling to pull money together every winter and every summer to respond to predicted and preventable emergencies in the shelter system. And yet, for the past 8 years, Toronto's mayors have not been proactive, have not planned and invested, and have instead called for budget freezes or budget cuts, and council has supported those calls. The crisis that happens each time the temperature drops is one that you created. You can fix the crisis, but you need to change the behavior that created it in the first place. As Stephen Huang and Capri Rabin noted this week, property taxes for houses and condos in Toronto are lower than all other GTA municipalities and lower than Hamilton and Ottawa. A modest increase in property taxes above the rate of inflation would help Toronto to meet the life or death needs of our most vulnerable residents. There are programs in place to defer property tax increases that low-income seniors and people with disabilities can't afford. To ensure that low-income people aren't adversely affected by an increase in property taxes, these programs could be enhanced. So it's not vulnerable homeowners that councillors are trying to protect, and it's disingenuous to claim otherwise. I feel like I'm out of time. Am I not out of time?
Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds.
Okay. I'm going to end there because I've got pages going. Pardon? I'll keep going.
Continue for a few more seconds.
All right. It's been heartening and inspiring to see residents of Toronto pool their money, time, and skills to find and pay for hotel rooms for some people without shelter, an overdose prevention site that has saved hundreds of lives. But we have a more systemic way of doing this, and one that has potential to reach people across our city. It's called the property tax, and I'm asking you again for the millionth time, it feels like, to use it. A society that builds inclusive neighborhoods that truly and meaningfully provide for members would include mental health support at the early stages when the need arises, schools that provide kids with the skills and education they need so their families and ability to afford a tutor or extracurricular activities does not put them at a disadvantage, housing that is available and affordable to people of all income levels in all parts of the city so that homelessness is history.
I have to get you to wrap up now.
Yeah, okay. Yesterday, a man went into the Maxwell Meagan homeless shelter because he had no home and needed somewhere to sleep. He left the shelter in a body bag. Dying in a shelter isn't much more dignified than dying on the street. Giving a person a mat on the floor to sleep on is not an adequate way to address homelessness. Homeless shelters are not an adequate way to address homelessness. These Band-Aid solutions are critically necessary right now, but they shouldn't be. The only reason they are is because of your government's refusal to do what it can to respond to our affordable housing crisis. Thank you for the opportunity to provide input into this year's budget.
Thank you. 5 minutes goes by quickly, doesn't it? Councillor Layton.
So I have to leave, but I'm glad I was here for this. You're essentially saying, look, raise the revenue to pay for the programs that you promised to deliver.
And then deliver the programs rather than saying it's not a problem and not planning to deliver them. Yes.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Carroll.
Thanks. Maggie Helwig was here earlier today, and she said that she had heard that someone had died in a shelter, but she didn't have the details. So essentially, they died of being part of our housing crisis.
Well, the point that I saw was that we don't know, and we don't know why they died, but being part of the housing crisis can't help.
Yeah.
And it's kind of awful that nobody knows that this person is an anonymous person who, you know, died, and we don't know what happened to them or what their situation was.
But bottom line, I've had a number of residents in my area who, they're affluent, have expressed concern, called and said, I don't like what I'm hearing about the cold snap shelter crisis. People who've never phoned me about housing before, so we hit the tipping point. But they all say the same thing over and over again, well, thank goodness no one's died. And that's just not the case, is it?
No, we haven't found a body of somebody frozen on the sidewalk, but that doesn't mean that people haven't died or people's lives haven't been harmed in a way that they will die, you know, days, weeks from now, younger than they would have otherwise.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Next is Cheryl Dugan. Or Duggan. Duggan, okay.
I'm just going to set my notes over there because I think for me tonight it would be better to speak from the heart.
That's the way we'd like to hear it.
My issue has to deal with not more spending, not hold them at where they are, but transparency and accountability with TCHC funding. I am a TCHC resident. I am so far from your Tenants First Council, partly because, to me, it's a tenants last initiative. We should have been on the mayor's task force to begin with. I've written some things that you city councilors will be familiar with. That's my tenant rep home and the manifesto on the final report of the mayor's task force on TCHC. I don't know why this stuff doesn't make sense, why there is so much gap between where TCHC says they're going to spend the money and where it's being spent. And I will give you a clear example, okay? We just had my quote-unquote community Christmas/holiday dinner, okay? End result was there was 8 of us who stuck around and ate our Swiss chalet dinners. They weren't even the festive specials with the cranberry sauce and the, see, now I'm getting flustered. The cranberry sauce, the stuffing, and the package of 5 Lindor chocolates, okay? They were just regular quarter chicken dinners, okay? Now, if half of those, okay, this is the only time I'll use my notes. If half of those were dark meat, okay, that cost $65.52, okay? If the other half were white meat, that's $73.52, for a grand total of $139.04. My tenant rep's budget was $1,000. My tenant rep spent all the money. She certainly did. Right off the bat, out the door, go 29 of those chicken dinners to God knows where. It's supposed to be a community dinner. I'm not sure what definition she was running by, but that didn't work for me. There was no, and the thing with me is I have a habit historically of helping out my community. Last year we had a community dinner. I found out about it. I'm like, okay, fine, I don't need to show up. I don't need to go and scarf with everybody else. I just need to know I contributed, okay? I contributed from big turkey roasters, 2 of them. We went dollar store shopping, got a whole bunch of stuff that they needed just for like the service part of it. And I went and got drinks. So this cost me, myself, on ODSP and through my own work initiatives. I do my own business stuff. I'm a photographer and stuff on the side. But, you know, through my own initiative, I put out $300 of my money And yet, you know, I'm finding out this year that the tenant rep had $1,000. What did she do with the money she had last year? If I had to contribute on all 3 levels. There's no accountability, and as far as I'm concerned, if we only have $139 of that money accounted for the people that actually took the time to sit and have dinner, which is what we were supposed to do with that money, then there's $860 missing. Oh, and let me not forget, there was a raffle. Okay, you'll love the raffle prizes. It took a lot of thought on her part. And I won these. Now, I can tell you for a fact, these came from Dollar Tree and were $1.25. Now, if the other people that were at that dinner had to come home with a door prize too, which were, you know, somehow, I don't know where the raffle took place or anything else, like, again, transparency, awesome concept. But, you know, if the other people that had dinner each won one, then that would bring the balance up to $150 of that $1,000 that's accounted for. And as far as I'm concerned, before you give TCHC another dollar, I want them to be held accountable for the dollars they already have.
You have to wrap up. Nope.
I'm good.
Councillor Carroll does have a question.
So you're very upset, we can tell. But we're in a bind because we can't deal with individual and personal issues. But I'm wondering, this is an overall accountability issue.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you have taken this concern to the board. Because our understanding here, as we allot funds through the property tax dollars, is that there will be accountability mechanisms, that the tenant reps, for instance, present a balance sheet to the rest of the tenants at some point in the year. So have you gone to the board and talked to them about this?
Our whole system's broken as far as tenant representation.
But have you gone to the
No, I haven't, because this was just recently.
Board of directors.
Like, our dinner was on January 1st, so I haven't had a chance to address them directly with them.
Yeah. So all we can do tonight is to highly recommend, you'd be helping us, let me put it that way, you'd be helping us if you took this to the TCHC Board of Directors at their Board of Directors meeting, because I know you can be added to the agenda there, but we assume those accountability mechanisms are there, or that our Auditor General will get to them eventually. So if you could go there to the board, that would be helping us as we fund them. Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next is Amy O'Neill. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, good evening. So thanks for the opportunity to allow me to make this deputation tonight. My name is Amy O'Neill, and I'm a manager of childcare at with St. Stephen's Community House. We're a nonprofit, multi-service United Way anchor agency serving the community primarily of downtown West Toronto and parts of North York. We have 5 licensed childcare sites serving approximately 400 families with children from birth to age 12 years old, and approximately 3/4 of them are subsidized families. I'm here today to speak to the Budget Committee in the capacity as a professional registered early childhood educator and as a mother and obviously a City of Toronto resident. While I applaud the Toronto Children's Services efforts to begin their implementation of their ambitious, council-approved 10-year childcare growth strategy, I want to stress the importance today of the continued sustainability of the affordability, accessibility, and quality of childcare in Toronto. At its very core, childcare is an investment in the future of our city. It's a vital service, and I'm here today to speak based on my experience from using the childcare system in Toronto. So over 15 years ago, I was a single mom raising very little children. Sadly, at that time, I had 2 choices. I could go to a women's shelter with my young children and one who was an infant and still nursing at the time, or I could maintain in my residence and go to work. However, I wouldn't have been able to work had I not maintained a child services subsidy. So anyone that lives in Toronto knows that licensed childcare is extremely costly for many parents in our city. I wouldn't have had a choice but to leave my residence, perhaps go on Ontario Works or go to a shelter if I hadn't have been able to maintain the subsidy with the help of my city councillor at the time on an as-needed basis. A recent study showed that 75% of families in Toronto find licensed childcare unaffordable. While the Children's Services net budget is frozen, the overall budget in children's services is up because of funding from the other levels of government. So the provincial and federal governments recently, as everybody's heard in the media, have made big, huge investments and commitments on childcare funding, which is important to the childcare situation in Toronto right now. This is the biggest investment and influx of funds I've seen in my entire career working in childcare. The city's 10-year capital plan includes provincial and city funding of approximately $49 million for the creation of 21 new childcare centres, adding over 1,100 spaces over the next 10 years. This is extremely ambitious and commendable for any of us that work in the sector. There are several new childcare centres in development and construction. However, there's been considerable underspending in the capital budget for new childcare centres over the past 5 years. This is according to Social Planning Toronto. Only 38% of approved funds were spent over the past 5 years. So at a time when the government of Ontario has committed to creating over 100,000 new childcare spaces across the province, this city needs to be looking at ways to continue to expand licensed childcare to be accessible and affordable for all families in Toronto. I'm asking you today to commit to make sure that every one of those federal, provincial, and city childcare dollars that have been committed by the other levels of government makes its way into the budget and all the way through to delivering the services on the front line. So as a frontline worker, I see this every day. How can the city do this? It means that Children's Services has to put all of those funds directly into funding childcare subsidies for low and middle income families. Number two, the general operating funding needs to be maintained or obviously improved to reduce the parent fees and improve the salaries of registered early childhood educators. And most importantly, the city needs to pay the childcare programs their true and actual costs of maintaining high quality childcare. Because the gap that the city is actually giving us and the per diems paid by the city and what it costs us to operate our programs is exactly the reason why parent fees continue to increase in the city. So from my own lived experience and what I see every day with the children and the families in my care, I can attest to you that providing the families in our city with safe, affordable, and high-quality childcare is essential to give children the best possible start in life.
Wrap up, please.
Okay, so my message is clear. I can say that for my children, attending a high-quality early and learning environment had long-term lasting effects. I was able to participate in the workforce, contribute to society, and financially support my family. I can unequivocally say that I would not be sitting here today in the capacity as a leader and advocate for quality care without that subsidy.
Thank you.
So I urge you to continue to maintain and stabilize childcare funding in the city.
Thank you.
But you're asking, when you say maintain, you would also like to see the 800 spaces that the province has made possible come on stream.
Right, so that's obviously in the long-term plan.
Right.
But I think my key piece to this is that the dollars that have been allocated from the provincial and the federal governments have to go into those spaces.
Yes, yes, right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Maddie Murier. Maddie Murari. Okay, next is Dominica Tambasco. Welcome.
Hello, thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, city councilors and the general public. I would like to make the following deputation concerning the 2018 budget for the City of Toronto and explain what I consider to be some very important reasons that you should support in full and possibly more funding for the Transform TO, Toronto's Climate Action Plan. One of the most powerful reasons to vote for this is to reduce the impact of climate disruption on the health of all people in the city, a problem that has already impacted many and which will become worse if preventive and mitigating policies and changes are not implemented now. As a primary care physician, I am seeing more and more health issues that are either directly or indirectly related to climate change and pollution of our air, water, food systems, and consumer products. The environmentally linked problems I see include asthma, allergies, multiple chemical sensitivities, gastrointestinal issues, obesity, hormonal disruption, stress, anxiety, depression. It is very difficult to manage a problem when the cause or trigger of it is unavoidable or beyond the individual's ability to control. When essential to life activities become a hazard, there is definitely a need to make change. We breathe 24/7 and can easily be exposed to harmful toxic elements in the air, from carbon monoxide to carcinogenic benzene. We eat and drink several times a day and commonly ingest pesticides and neurotoxic mercury. Most of us, knowingly or not, apply endocrine disrupting chemicals on our skin on a daily basis. More and more of the younger generations are developing both chronic and sometimes life-threatening illnesses related to climate change and pollution. The price of the healthcare system then keeps going up. There's definitely an urgent need to develop and implement broad sweeping environmental and climate change prevention strategies. Imagine, for starters, the elimination of diesel and other toxic fossil fuel emitting vehicles, replaced with electric or other clean, renewable methods, with more walkable neighborhoods and other active transportation. This will translate into less heart, lung, obesity, and diabetes problems. This will translate into decreased healthcare costs. Imagine buildings using the greenest technology to improve energy efficiency, including more urban gardens and green space, perhaps incorporating an edible garden for each building. Done right, this can improve the air quality by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, decreasing volatile organic chemicals, and increasing the free oxygen provided by plants. Imagine the widespread implementation of the 3 Rs, reduce, reuse, recycle, through taxes imposed on the companies that actually produce the most polluting products or that have traveled the farthest, putting mandatory labels on all consumer products regarding their toxic ratings, and further educating the public about their role in reducing, reusing, and recycling efforts. The problem of climate change and pollution cannot be addressed in isolation. It must be addressed as a collaborative effort across divisions, institutions, and communities. This will require a large investment, at least as much as that was earmarked for refurbishing the Gardiner. If we value our health and that of our children, we would show that with our actions. I will conclude by reminding Toronto Council that Transform TO is an excellent opportunity to show leadership and long-term responsibility. You now have an opportunity to be a hero for the health of all Torontonians, especially for that of our children. I'm inviting you to take on that responsibility by voting fully to fund Transform TO and implementing this as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Daryl Pinto.
Good evening. So my name is Daryl, and I'm a resident of Ward 6. So disappointingly for me, not only was the planned $6.7 million for Transform TO reduced to $2.5 million, it is not fully funded in the 2018 proposed budget. I'm wearing multiple hats today, and I would like to share with you 3 perspectives on why Transform TO should be funded. First, my innovation hat. I work close by to here on Bay Street in the venture capital industry, arguably one of the major arteries into the beating heart of Canadian innovation. I have the pleasure of seeing bright entrepreneurial talent transform the world into a better place by solving big problems. The Transform TO plan, targeting reduction of the city's carbon emissions by 80% by 2050, is a similar ambitious reimagination of the city, and one that will test its entrepreneurial muscle. If it is successful, it will set Toronto apart as an innovative leader compared to other global cities struggling with the same problem. Second, my immigrant hat. I came to Canada more than 30 years ago and share a common discipline with many other immigrants in the city. Invest wisely to buffer against a rainy day when life throws you an unexpected curveball. This city has already experienced many unexpected rainy curveballs, and there are more to come. So I urge you to invest with a long-term mindset to proactively buffer against these. Third, my economic hat. I'm a data-driven individual and do not have patience for rhetoric and fear-mongering. The facts on this issue are quite clear to me. According to a Toronto Environment Office study, we can expect significant precipitation increases and more extreme weather events by the year 2050. We know that each extreme weather event, like the recent flooding, already creates damage totaling millions of dollars. On the positive side, a transition to a low-carbon economy is estimated to generate over 300,000 new person years of employment. In short, investing now to avoid damage costs and create jobs, I mean, that's an amazing win-win multiplier effect. To summarize, I request these 3 things. 1, make Toronto an innovative city. 2, adopt an immigrant-like long-term investment horizon. And 3, protect our community and create jobs at the same time. The total unfunded allocation for Transform TO in 2018 is a mere $2.5 million, which is a fraction of 1%, of the city's $10 billion plus budget. I therefore urge you to recommend fully funding the Transform TO plan in the 2018 budget. Thank you for hearing my deputation.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Quick question, because you mentioned that you're in venture capital as well in your consulting business. We're only talking about $2.5 million to lay the foundation for Transform TO. I asked this question because I read an interesting article, I can't remember if it was The Guardian or The Economist or something recently. A lot of people, target venture capital and say they're not doing enough. And the article reminded us that things like Google and Yahoo actually started with a bit of public investment. If we're investing in Transform TO here, does that send a signal to venture capital if they want to invest in the green economy, they should follow Transform TO and invest it here?
So, absolutely yes. I mean, this is such a big problem. What you need is many players rowing in the same direction.
Right.
And the signal is a very important part
we
of
have
the
to
equation.
send the signal.
Absolutely, absolutely. The venture capitalists are already trying to invest in technologies that will get us there, but I think the city can do its part.
Right, right. I'm tempted to ask you the joking question. I have to apologize if you saw us laughing at because of what a colleague said. I was tempted to say, you're on Bay Street. Do you have $150 lunches in Yorkville, and do you do it all in 2 hours? Because that was the Twitter conversation yesterday about our transit missing from the budget, the 2-hour time-based transfer.
Yeah, I'm happy to report the answer to that is no. I don't work for an organization like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next is Sarah Buchanan.
Hi, my name is Sarah Buchanan, and I work at Environmental Defence on Ontario climate policy. I have spent a lot of time in this room, and as some of you know, I see some familiar faces. I used to work at City Hall, but I've never actually come up and spoken at the mic before, so this is my first time. So when I heard that Transform TO, a plan that I am extremely proud of as a Torontonian, I'm proud of Toronto for creating it, I'm proud of Council for unanimously supporting it. When I heard that it wasn't getting proper funding, it seemed like a good time to get up and speak on the mic for the first time. And I'm new to environmental work, and to be honest, when I started working on climate change policy, I was worried I would crawl off into a hole of depression after seeing the stats and the science behind it, and that I'd never be seen again. But that didn't happen, actually. Surprisingly, I have, and my friends don't believe me about this, I have more hope than I did a year ago after having studied a small amount of climate policy. And that's partly because of plans like Transform TO, plans that are ambitious, are models for other municipalities who want to take bold, big steps, and just because of the amazing work that went into this plan. And I also have more hope than I did a year ago because I've seen the tools that we have to make change in our society, not future tools, tools of the present, tools like electric vehicles, tools like energy efficiency for our homes, renewable energy where the prices are dropping exponentially so that they're now at price parity with fossil fuels in many cases. So we have all these tools now, and that gives me a lot of hope. However, the flip side of that is that I've learned how much work we have to do to use these tools and to convince our governments to fund and use these tools. And to meet our greenhouse gas reduction targets, we do have to do the work, and we do have to commit to following these plans and sustainably funding these plans, like Transform TO, like the Climate Change Action Plan, like the Pan-Canadian Framework. And if we keep delaying and if we keep partially funding these plans and kind of doing them, it's not going to work. We are not going to meet our targets. And in fact, we're seeing now that we're on track to completely miss our 2020 target at a federal level. So Toronto has been stepping up and doing a lot, but federally we're way behind. And in fact, the Federal Environmental Commissioner came out with a report in the fall saying that criticizing the government for having basically abandoned the 2020 goal and moving now towards 2030. So Toronto, back to Toronto, where we are. Toronto, as you know, is a very large city, and we have a huge impact on how Canada can make progress on meeting our goals. So we can either continue to be a leader and make real progress in cutting our emissions and model change, or we can decide to turn our backs and say we don't really care that much, and we could be a huge drag on Canada potentially meeting our Paris Agreement targets if we decide to go that route. And I just, on the note of Paris, I want to say that our mayor went to Paris, and that's great, and stood up and made a commitment to keep warming to 2 degrees or lower. And what I'm asking for is just to keep that commitment and to follow the plan with some very bold action to keep that commitment and make that happen. And no one at that conference stood up and agreed to take partial action or to partially fund plans. But unfortunately, a lot of them left that room and did just that. And I think Toronto is better than that. And I think we can do more. I'll skip over you all know the 2.5 million number is what many of us are asking for. And I think it's a small price to pay to recommit to solving one of the biggest challenges that humanity is facing right now. Deciding that it's more important to keep property taxes lower than most of our neighbors doesn't seem like it's more important to me than facing this huge challenge and taking really bold steps to do so. I also want to mention that some recent polling suggests that people and Canadians, particularly in urban centers like Toronto, they do want to see their governments take more action on climate change. In fact, a recent poll from Eco Analytics says that 73% of Canadians want their governments to do more to limit further climate change from happening. 73%, that's a pretty large majority. And a recent Abacus poll revealed that half of Canadian voters would not consider voting for a party or a candidate that doesn't have a plan to combat climate change. And we do in fact have that plan, and that's Transform TO, and I'd love to see full funding be given to that.
Thank you. Yes.
So the federal stats or the federal progress report, I guess I should say, is helpful, except that you probably know, because from formerly working in Toronto, we didn't used to set our watches by what the feds were doing because they weren't doing anything. So we simply zoomed ahead.
Yep.
Created the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. Created C40 climate change. C40 was, Edward was here earlier, Edward G, mentioned C40. We're not only members of it, we started it when it was only C20. And so we didn't used to set our watches by them. Now, unless we do this 2.5 million, we're behind federal progress, is what you're saying.
Right, and unfortunately, greenhouse gases don't respect municipal boundaries. So, if you know, if we're not meeting our federal targets, then I guess what I'm saying is we need to do as much as we possibly can at Toronto. Even if we are meeting our targets, why not exceed those targets? Why not push as much as we can?
And the 2.5 is for staffing. It's the foundational staffing. Some of it needs to be permanent. Some of it is to plan project-based for a time period. But some of it are people that have to stay there or we're not getting to 2050 at all. So you want not just a one-time 2.5 million, but we've got to sustainably put it in there and not have this argument again next year.
Wonderful. Yeah, I would love to not be back here next year. As much as I love seeing everyone here, it would be great if I didn't have to, you know, ask again.
Yes, thanks. Great to see you. Thanks for coming here instead of East York.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Next is Jason Hansma.
Thank you. This is my first time here, so forgive me if it doesn't go as well as it should.
It'll go great.
I'm from Ward 28. I would like to thank you, the Budget Committee, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My reason for being here is to ask the committee to invest in Transform TO. I'm 26. What I do for a living is I'm one of those people who annoys you at your home asking for money for charity. Maybe we've spoken before, or you close the door in my face. Like, that's okay. I don't hold any grudges. One of the charities I'm doing right now is Greenpeace, which I know the government just absolutely loves. And in the past, I've done UNHCR, which is like the UN Refugee Agency. That's when it really hit for me how bad things are right now. We have about 65 million and growing displaced people, and about a third, if not more, are climate change refugees. And that number is dramatically increasing all the time. So when I talk to people about climate change, or what it should be called climate crisis, I'm baffled. The average person seems to have some knowledge on the subject, but no real depth about why it's happening or how dire it is. I find this extremely troubling, especially if it's coming from people with power. I'm going to provide just a quick message from the people who we should all be listening to, scientists. In 1992, some 1,700 of the world's leading scientists penned a letter warning the world that humans need to drastically change their ways. We are damaging the atmosphere, water resources, oceans, soil, forest, living species, and the fact that we needed to dramatically curb our population growth. That was 25 years ago. Where do you think we are now? Honestly, much, much worse off. And well, and to commemorate that integral letter, 15,000 scientists this year, the most scientists ever to co-sign and formally support a published journal article, signed a new letter calling on the world to wake up. With the population rising by 2 billion, our problems have only been exacerbated with rampant losses of animal life, water, and forests, and rises in ocean dead zones and animal agriculture. I understand these things are beyond your control, but it needs to be a collective group globally that takes action on the catastrophic predicament that we're in. And I appreciate that John Tory was in Paris doing those things. The one silver lining in this letter is that the ozone layer has begun to heal itself. This is a result of bold government action. Countries came together and cleaned up their act, eliminating ozone-depleting chemicals from our atmosphere. Now, the Paris Climate Accord is a similar venture. However, it is non-binding and it is only through government action and badgering by the public to actually create the drastic action needed. So in 2015, you guys voted for the Adopt Transform TO, I believe aiming for the reduction of carbon emissions by 30%. And then this past July, the second part of Transform TO was approved with a reduction of 80% by 2050. I could talk about, maybe I should talk more about the jobs that are created, like over 300,000, and retrofitting 100% of homes and building new low carbon buildings, as well as like the target of having 100% low carbon transportation, which will increase public health and air quality. This plan sounds amazing, and I'm very glad that we're on the way and that it's got approved. All that's needed is to actually fund this. To invest in this at $2.5 million, it seems like it's a very small number compared to the entire budget, and I understand that it's the foundation, so it will increase as it needs to. I worry about the future of our planet, of our city, our future generations, like that my nephews and nieces will inherit. Right? What world are we looking at? Are we going to look back on politicians favorably or negatively, or even at all, depending on where we're at? Climate change is going to be bad no matter what we do. However, it does not have to be catastrophic. It's really up to you. Especially for me personally, and young people, like that one guy who spoke earlier from high school, there's a lot of anxiety going on because we don't know where we're headed. And like there's gonna be such a change up with jobs and just livelihoods. It's super stressful what's going on. And especially in a first world country, but you see the third world countries right now that it's brutal. It's brutal. So I know like that's not something we can we can actually have a direct effect because we lower our carbon emissions. That helps everyone out. So thank you for letting me talk today, and please approve funding for Transform TO.
Thank you. Next is Ray Kowalchuk.
Ray texted me to say he'll be here very soon, so I asked if he could be put farther down.
Okay, yep, we'll hold it for him.
Thank you.
Next is Derek Moran.
I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. So for the record, I just want to put out there that I've sent emails to the acting CFO, Joe Farag, Integrity Commissioner Valerie Jepson, and the councillor from my area, Councillor Kristen Carmichael Greb, relating to this item, and they've actually yet to get back to me, but I'm sure they will eventually. I don't know if anyone in the past 3 days has brought up international law, because it actually... Thank you. It actually has something to do with this. In Canada, the Canada Prime Minister versus Omar Khadr, 2010, the Supreme Court of Canada said, "The principles of fundamental justice are to be found in the basic tenets of our legal system." Re BC Motor Vehicle Act, 1985, Supreme Court of Canada. They are informed by Canadian experience and jurisprudence and take into account Canada's obligations and values as expressed in the various sources of international human rights law by which Canada is bound. Now, I noticed a few months ago your colleague, Councillor Perks, was trolling Councillor Karygiannis on Twitter about housing being a right. And I thought to myself, you know, does Councillor Perks actually know what he's talking about, or is he just parroting what somebody else said to him? So I said to Councillor Perks, like, just to be fair to Councillor Karygiannis, like, where does it actually say that? And boom, within a couple minutes, Councillor Perks right there came back with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25A. And I thought, whoa, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. And then I added, I was hoping you'd say that, Councillor Perks, don't forget Article 11 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Because how many people actually know that these documents even exist? Because they're a little bit more encompassing than the Constitution we have. And today, I wanted to read out onto the public record what these documents actually have to say in regards to what Councillor Perks brought up. Article 25, Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, "Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing," something that's come up recently, housing, "and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. all children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same protection. The International Covenant that I just, Economic Social Rights that I just read, Article 11. The states parties to the present covenant recognize the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living for himself and his family, including adequate food, clothing, housing, and to the continuous improvement of living conditions. The states parties will take appropriate steps to ensure the realization of this right, recognizing to this effect the essential importance of international cooperation based on free consent. The states parties to the present covenant, recognizing the fundamental right of everyone to be free from hunger, shall take individually and through international cooperation the measures, including specific programs, which are needed. Now, how do we pay for all this? Councillor Pasternak recently brought up a motion about going out there and getting a constitutional scholar to look into and give an opinion on whatever he was dealing with. So the constitutional scholar, and I brought up this a while back at the police board or administrative penalty system, Peter Hogg is the guy. So Peter Hogg also mentioned in GNWT, Department of Education, Culture and Employment, 2010, Supreme Court of Northwest Territories, as discussed by Professor Peter Hogg in his Constitutional Law of Canada text, it has been suggested that security of the person includes the economic capacity to satisfy basic human needs. And that sounds really great to everybody, except everyone thinks that security in Section 7 of the Constitution means safety. I was going over this with a constitutional lawyer on Twitter the other day, Emmett McFarlane, and he told me I was wrong, and Scott Duncan showed up and called him a liar. But see these maxims of law, the treasury, dower, life, and liberty are things favored in law, and there's another one, causes of dower, life, liberty, and revenue are among things favored in law. That's basically Section 7 of the Constitution, except putting treasury and revenue would be a little bit too obvious and reveal the truth too much, but what the government did was put in security and lead everyone to believe that it means safety, and if everyone goes home and takes a look at the birth certificate, they'll realize, oh my God, it looks like a mini stock certificate. Except I've run out of time, and maybe if Councillor Carroll wants to throw me a softball question, I can expand upon that.
Thank you.
I will lob a softball. So
Councillor
when you say security of the person, what we really mean is the security of being a person able to live, food security, and on and on and on, shelter security. That's the difference, isn't it?
No, if you look at the back of a current birth certificate, and tell her I said thank you for this. One of the good things that Premier Wynne has actually done is on the back of every new birth certificate, she gives proper notice. This certificate identifies a valuable foundation identity document. Foundation is a corporation, Crown Foundations Act. People are given in their name to do charitable works. Remember, you gave me a thumbs up at the Police Board Charity. So the security basically is, if you read Section 7 of the Bills of Exchange Act, it mentions dividends. Mm-hmm. Those dividends were meant to go straight to the people, but because we never claimed them with the birth certificate, which is the financial assets mentioned in the Securities Transfer Act of Ontario, we never claimed them, they go straight to the Registrar General because it's considered abandoned property. And the Crown, under law, all abandoned property always has to be owned by someone, so when it's abandoned, it automatically reverts back to the Crown. Everyone needs to claim the equitable security that they are given to basic human needs, like I just mentioned.
Thank you.
Hire Peter Hogg.
Next is Riley Peterson. Welcome, Riley.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here today on behalf of the Toronto Youth Cabinet, the city's official youth advisory body. So since May of 2017, the Cabinet has been asking that Council, at the very minimum, fund its $41 million in commitments of the various city strategies and plans. It's disappointing knowing that you're only setting aside roughly $9 million of unallocated funds when the poverty reduction strategy alone would cost over $38.4 million. This is out of the almost $11 billion operating budget. Inequality is on the rise and is the biggest issue that this city currently faces. We should all know the statistics by now. Toronto is the child poverty capital of Canada, with 1 in 4 children living in poverty, and in some parts of the city that number increases to 1 in 3. In my neighborhood of Weston, that number increases to 40% of children living in poverty. We have social housing and shelter crises. People don't have access to healthy and affordable food. Accessibility continues to be a barrier for too many Torontonians. Our public transit is simply inadequate in most inner suburban communities. We're not addressing climate change in the way that we should be, and the waitlist for recreation programs has grown by 74% in the last few years. Throughout the week, we've heard from hundreds of Torontonians, and the message is clear. They need and care about our city services. Affordable recreation programs have had a positive impact on my life as well as the lives of many other youth. I was fortunate enough to be given access to swimming lessons and have continued library resources at my hands. Funding deficits towards the expansion of recreation programs means that over 60,000 residents will be left on wait lists and unable to participate in programs that positively impact their lives the way that they did mine. A friend of mine from the TYC, who is a university student from Scarborough, is constantly worried about his 13-year-old brother crossing the street because of the number of pedestrian fatalities that have happened in his neighborhood. He was shocked to see that the school crossing guard program was left unfunded in the preliminary budget. The city budget needs to do a better job of addressing the many needs of youth, like the expansion and strengthening of the Toronto Public Library's youth hubs, Sunday service, and Wi-Fi lending. For myself and many others, the library provides a space to study, read, and meet with friends at youth hubs. Clearly, these programs and services are not just nice-to-haves. These programs are vital to the well-beings of not just youth, but all Torontonians. As a young person, I'm becoming increasingly worried about my future in the city. Will my friends and I be able to continue to live here as it becomes more and more unaffordable? Over-relying on drawing from reserves and from the municipal land transfer tax is gambling with the futures of young people in Toronto. We need sustainable revenue sources to ensure that we don't have to keep coming back year after year basically begging for our vital services to be funded. You have these tools at your disposal and can immediately implement new revenue-generating tools. At the Toronto Youth Cabinet, we've had many discussions about what kind of city we want to live in and a kind of budget process that we would like to see. We hope that after tonight you'll consider aligning with the kind of city we want to inherit. What more does council need to hear in order to realize that ending the stark inequality that exists in our city should be our top priority in our city budget rather than keeping property taxes low? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Riley, I'm just now, it's been tweeted by Jennifer Pagliaro. I guess is going to be in her coverage of all of this in the Star, and we talked about it in the afternoon session before you got here. Again and again, we were hearing from the public, and in our questions, getting positive answers on the very thing that you and I and Joe Panichetti talked about at the U of T, the idea that we need to, at the earliest, if we can start at the beginning of the next political term, that we need to start a budget process that engages the community before we lock ourselves in at a number and launch the budget and say, here it is, go ahead and tweak. That pre-process.
Yeah.
Is the youth cabinet sort of wrapping their head around that such that they can propose how they'd be involved?
Yes, we love that idea. I think that we would be open to working with local councillors in their wards on how to better engage youth in the process. And I think that if more councillors were to do earlier consultation with their residents, they would see that we actually all have a lot in common. We all take the bus, we all need housing, and I think there's kind of a cynical view of what Torontonians want, but I think if they did that consultation, they'd see that we want this city to be a better city for everyone.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Jacob Pendergrast. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Jacob Pendergrast. I'm a physician at the University Health Network. I'm a practicing hematologist. I am grateful for the opportunity to depute here today. This is my first time doing such a thing. And I'd like to speak in favor of fully funding Transform TO. As we've heard, there are many reasons to support this plan, and I'm here to focus on the effect it will have on our health And according to current estimates from Toronto's Public Health Department, air pollution generated by the city's cars and trucks kills 280 people each year and hospitalizes over 1,000 others. This doesn't include the death and illness from collisions with pedestrians, cyclists, and other drivers. This is just from the exhaust. And if you include the air pollution arising from the natural gas we use to heat our residential and commercial buildings, the number rises to 470 premature deaths and nearly 1,500 hospitalizations in Toronto each year. That is a horrifying statistic. It's equivalent to Toronto's entire city council dying from cancer, respiratory, and cardiac disease every 10 days, year after year after year. But setting aside the moral revulsion from that, I want to talk about instead how much money that is costing us. Using a model developed by Health Canada called the Air Quality Benefits Assessment Tool, Toronto's Public Health Department calculated recently that 470 premature deaths from air pollution costs us over $2 billion each year. That's just what those deaths cost us. That does not include the cost of the hospitalizations, the sick days, and the long-term disability that result from chronic exposure to air pollution. The staggering financial cost of Toronto's air pollution is not something that you will ever have to explicitly sign off on when you're approving the city budget. But it's in there. It will show up in the money we spend every year on public health. It'll show up in the money we spend on paramedical services. And probably more to the point, it shows up regularly in the funding that we do not receive every year from the province, which is currently spending nearly 40% of the entire provincial budget on healthcare, or $50 billion a year and growing. It's in that context that you, our elected officials, need to consider the $2.5 million request for incremental funding of Transform TO as proposed in the 2018 budget. And there are many reasons we need to embrace this plan, as spoken to earlier. It will help mitigate climate change. It will build greater resiliency against increasingly frequent and intense natural disasters. With Transform TO, we will be joining forces with other major cities around the world who are performing similar initiatives with the goal of protecting the future of our planet and our species. It is the right thing to do. But even viewed through the lens of simply what this plan will do to help reduce death and illness from air pollution, which is one very small benefit, really, when you think about the scope of the entire plan, it is simply the financially responsible thing to do, while we are all choking on pollution, which again is coming from fossil fuels that are fueling our vehicles and our buildings. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Warren Chalmers.
Hello, it's Sam Chalmers.
Okay, I'd had Sam in parentheses there, okay.
Okay, I'm Sam Chalmers, and I volunteer for at LAMP, and I'm actively involved with harm reduction, and I'm also homeless. I just want to thank everybody here for actually speaking here. I think it's an honor and a privilege just to be talking here. I never thought I'd be talking in a budget committee. I'm going to put that in my bucket list. Anyways, I'll make this brief. I know it's been a long day. My issue is obviously housing, right? And I know there's a big thing about affordability of housing, and I know that's a problem, but my problem is availability of housing, right? And I'm not the only one that has that problem. And with availability, I mean, for instance, credit. I have poor credit, so right away that cuts me out of any possibility of getting an apartment. Someone does a credit check on me, I'm done. And there's also if you're on ODSP or OW, there's a stigma that you're on it. So you can't let the landlord know that you're on that. So you have to kind of work your way around that. So it's again, it's not the affordability that's a big issue for me. It's availability, and most people are like that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know all the answers to these problems. I know they're quite, it's quite a thing, right? But my issue right now is basically in the West End, there's a big problem with homelessness. And it's a lot of it has to do with most of the shelters and everything to help out the people who are homeless are central. It's in the core. When I see the West End, I mean like Mimico, New Toronto, around the Lakeshore, around that area. And there's a lot of, I guess you say, marginalized people out there that are stuck there. And the reason why they stay there and they don't go to the core is because they have things like they got to go to the pharmacy every day for methadone, and they're tied to that community. So to go to the core, go to these shelters, it's a big upheaval. So they end up staying in apartment buildings and some of the most horrible places. And if somebody does get an apartment, what we do is try to help each other. We all try to keep each other in there, and then we get kicked out of those places because there's too many people in the apartment. It breaks fire laws and things like that. So it's a bit of a catch-22. So that's basically my problem. And I guess well, if you want to know what I'm asking for, it's to a lot more resources or whatever you can do for that area, the West End. Because we need shelter. I don't think there's any shelter in that area. I think there's a one female shelter and it doesn't support very many people. But I can't think of anything else. But I know, like, this is how bad it was last year around Lamp. There was about 10 people living outside of the community center there, of the center, and the housing that was in Lamp, they were basically doing nothing. They were giving us bus tokens and telling us to go downtown. And like I said, a lot of us can't. So, but this girl, Sarah Craig, who was in harm reduction, she was helping us out quite a bit. God bless her. And so basically, just to conclude, it would be nice to have some money allotted to that area, Mimico and New Toronto around the Lakeshore. And that's it.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Sam. You've just described a lot of things about what lands people in homelessness that I think a lot of us, because we earn a salary that's enough to keep us in homes and actually to keep us in pretty good credit standing, that they don't understand how easy it is for that to happen. And you're talking about evictions that are not, oh, you didn't pay your rent, but people are being evicted now for things like, we just don't like how many people now live in your apartment.
They call it too much traffic.
Right, and basically the number of people in the apartment grew because you were letting people who were themselves homeless come and join you, because what else could you do?
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm starting to hear that now in my ward, and I'm north of the 401, and so it's causing evictions, and we don't have a tenant in crisis. We can sometimes have, well, in one case, 14 people were in crisis. Can you help us? We've been evicted, and 14 of them then had to find someplace. Right. So I appreciate your coming and describing it, because it is now a part of the public record, and all 45, including Mr. Mayor, need to hear this, and he will be looking at the broadcast of our meeting tonight. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just as a side, I'm at the Armory that I guess I got to thank the city for opening up. I'm there right now, and everything's going great there. So it'd be nice to have that in Mimico or in Toronto.
Good. Well,
thank you for adding that.
All right.
Thank you very much, Sam. Next is Paula Turtle.
Good evening, councillors, and thank you for hearing from me. My name is Paula Turtle, and I'm a Toronto resident and an avid cyclist. I commute to work, to social events, and for many of my errands by bike. I'm also a member of the Advocacy Committee of Cycle Toronto. I have submitted fairly detailed written remarks that I understand the committee will have an opportunity to access. So I don't intend, particularly at this late hour, to take you through that document word for word. But what I would like to do is spend a few minutes highlighting the key areas of my concerns, with the understanding that you will hopefully take the opportunity to review my submissions on another occasion. First, I want to give a bit of background and context. It may be obvious, but I think it bears pointing out that as an older woman, I probably do not fit the traditional image of a cyclist whose regular mode of transport in the city is by bike. But I have to say, based on what I've seen in Toronto's streets recently, I don't think I am unique. I'm part of a large and growing group of increasingly diverse cyclists in Toronto, including women, persons with disabilities, new Canadians, and younger and older persons. We're all using Toronto's bike lanes, and it makes sense to encourage more of us to do so. The evidence is clear. Building bike lanes encourages their use and creates an incentive for more Toronto residents to get on their bikes and ride, especially among groups that are historically underrepresented in the bike riding population. The city has already recognized that promoting cycling is good public policy for many reasons. Among other things, the promotion of cycling is good for the health of the city's population, and it's good for the environment. And I don't need to repeat what I know you've already heard from many people appearing before you about the consequences of increasing greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So expanding Toronto's bike network so that cycling is not just accessible to more Toronto residents, but to a more diverse group of Toronto residents is consistent with these policy objectives. And my comments this evening are directed at encouraging the budget process to focus on achieving this objective. Vision Zero is an important commitment by the city, but that commitment is only meaningful as long as the number of fatalities and serious injuries in Toronto's streets is actually reduced to zero, as its name implies. And I do want to take a moment and express my support for the provision in the preliminary budget documents of funding for 2 new cycling unit staff and 2 new staff focused on implementing Vision Zero. But I would urge the city not to stop there. The city can and should, in my submission, do more to expedite the implementation of the cycling network plan. You don't have to look further than recent news reports to know that since that plan was approved, there have been significant investments by the province and the federal government in Toronto's cycling infrastructure. And I'm urging the city to step up and set a target date for full implementation of the plan by the end of the next term of council in 2022. I think the pace with which the city is implementing the plan, quite frankly, lags behind the significant public interest in the creation of more bike lanes, especially in regions outside of downtown, and areas that the city itself has recognized are underserviced, like Scarborough, North York, and Etobicoke, and the establishment of better protected bike lanes and not just painting sharrows on the roads. Safe bike lanes in Toronto's major corridors are an essential part of a proper bike network. Without bike lanes in the major corridors, the city is going to be left with a patchwork, quite frankly, of bike zones in different regions whose usefulness will be reduced by the fact that they're not connected by and to the streets where the action is, the major corridors. When the plan was approved in 2016, most of the major corridor studies were put on hold, and we urged the city to make provision in the budget to reinstate those studies effective immediately, because as the Bloor Street bike lanes have proved, if you build protected bike lanes, even on the busy streets, the major corridors, people will use them, and people who maybe historically would not have considered getting on their bikes will get on their bikes and cycle in those protected lanes. It makes sense to create incentives for more of Toronto's residents to embrace cycling. 2 more brief points: winter snow clearance. If we don't have reliable, sustainable funding to ensure that the lanes are cleared in the winter, then the lanes are useless. More and more people are cycling in the winter. The climate in Toronto permits it now. The other issue is parking. People aren't going to get on their bikes and ride and spend money in stores and restaurants if there's not enough parking. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That was the last speaker. Is there anybody else who wished to? Ray, so whose? Oh, yes, I am sorry, Ray Kowalchuk. Yes, you're right. Okay, Ray, then you would be the last. Now, if there's anybody else who wants to speak, just come up and give your name to the clerks. Sorry, Ray, it's all yours.
No problem. My name is Ray Kowalchuk, and my wife and I own a house in Oak Ridge for 3 years with our 2 kids. Previous to that, we rented in the Eastland Park area of Danforth Avenue, and over 7 years watched it develop into a forward-thinking neighborhood with a strong identity and a balance of arts, leisure, community, and commerce. We see our new home in the crossroads of the Danforth Road and Avenue, a section of City Ward 35, a bit more raw in materials, yet it has the same potential. With a newfound understanding of climate change, we see the need for neighborhoods and the neighbors to be resilient when the ice storms or heat waves hit, and even more frequently and at a higher intensity. This can only be accomplished with a city that properly understands climate change and its dangers. And we feel that whatever cursory understanding our neighbors have of climate, it falls short of crisis. Toronto needs a strong, coherent narrative on how climate disruption will affect us, our children, and our elders, and reassure everyone that our services are resilient and growing in the most logical direction. Given the Transform TO action plan for the funding to develop and secure the narrative is important to us as denizens of Toronto and Ward 35. Climate change is not just a looming threat for the future. It is something that already affects our lives. I grew up in Leaf Rapids, a small mining town in northern Manitoba, and we experienced 2 evacuations due to forest fires over the 3 decades of living there. In the spring of 2016, the unseasonable fires in Fort McMurray, a community at the same latitude as Leaf Rapids, made me realize that Canada's boreal forest and the people and animals who live there will be living in a state of constant threat from fire as climate change makes seasons more erratic and unpredictable. After I moved to Toronto and my parents moved to Souris, Manitoba, to my grandparents' homestead, the threat changed to seasonal flooding and saturation of groundwater. In the spring of 2011, the waters of the Souris River rose and receded from the doorsteps of our family homestead 3 times, signaling to the town council that climate change would make the 1 in 300-year floods become extremely more frequent. This inspired them to build a permanent flood dike through the low-lying parts of the town, protecting the homesteads. Unfortunately, the plan left 1 permanent dwelling on the wrong side of the dike, my parents' home. When a floodgate was opened in an upstream community, the water rose and flooded our house, which has remained abandoned ever since. My parents cut their losses and moved to Ontario. I no longer live in Leaf Rapids, Souris, or anywhere in Manitoba, but I recognize that climate change will not be selective to whom it affects. My actions, including how I manage my ecological footprint and how I vote, have impacts on the global atmosphere for which we all share. I've educated myself to optimize my impacts and share this knowledge through a grassroots movement called Climate Vegan. My wife left her career as a manager with eBay Canada to launch her vegan catering business, wherein she plans to chart the emissions attributed to her wares for Torontonians who want to optimize the climate impacts of their food. We know that our vegan diets are insufficient without a movement that includes a motivated community, city, and country. How can low emissions catering and other green businesses grow within a city that do not promote climate change awareness? Transform TO was unanimously voted by the council as an excellent and important idea. It is now time to turn that idea into action, and that means you need to help to approve the full budget of the project. If the City of Toronto cares about the future, we will be motivated to develop the green businesses of tomorrow today. Thank you for the opportunity to express this need.
Thank you. Next and last is Ian Wheel. Welcome, Ian.
Well, first of all, I'm very grateful to be allowed to make this presentation, and I'll do it as quickly as possible. And it concerns only one issue, but I think it is an issue that should be very, very important and should be monitored and looked at by the City of Toronto, namely erosion of Toronto Islands. I have been to Toronto Islands over the last 60 years since I've been a resident of Toronto, and have been there dozens of times. I can't just even imagine, over 100 times at least. And so what I'm going to do is simply focus on the situation as it is at present, and as it was in the past, with reference to the future. The erosion of Toronto Islands should be monitored, and endangered sites should be monitored. They should be protected. And where and what are those sites? Well, there are several. All island agencies should act and be consulted. New bodies should be created and centered there on the islands. Allocate more space to green space, especially through Transform TO. Above all, utilize Toronto Islands Farm. We've heard a lot about all the other farms and how well some of them are doing, but we don't hear anything about the island farm, and I'm sure that's something that could be looked at. Utilize the island farm, therefore. Utilize former agencies that don't exist anymore, such as the YWCA, and women who were workers and planters and gardeners on the islands before the First World War. The motto, by the way, of the First World War 1917 era was "Grow something" in Toronto. That was 100 years ago. Grow something. They didn't say what. Then I'll briefly mention very quickly the past. Disasters have been many: storms, rainstorms, snowstorms, and to the former Leyte Peninsula until 1857, and of course the Toronto Islands since 1858. And of course you think, well, how do I know all of this? Well, I'm a Toronto archaeologist and historian, and I have particularly paid interest through regular visits. I don't think I've hardly ever missed a year that I didn't go to the Toronto Islands. So the erosion problem has existed since 1858, and the word is mentioned directly in January 1858 in a report, and that's 160 years ago. And the storm, one of the earliest was September 1804. It's described in the Montreal Courant and the Plater Diary. And that storm, while not singling out the island, did single out the whole of the town of York. So it must have been quite devastating. Anyway, to conclude, I made 6 visits to the island in 2017, either by myself or as a walk leader. I've undertaken numerous island walks in the last 25 years, and I've worked on the island at the Natural Science School for a week or two in 1975-76. And as I say, I've been to the islands over a 60-year period. So I think I do know something about the islands. So that's my big plug. Monitor, construct, create, and safeguard the islands from any future flooding or disaster of any kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I conclude.
Thank you, Ian. Seeing any other speakers? Seeing none, I just want to thank you. I guess that concludes the public deputations for the 2018 budget process. So I want to thank everybody for the contributions. From here, the Budget Committee will be taking all of the considerations and everything you've mentioned this Friday, and I believe on the 23rd we'll be doing recommendations that'll go off to executive and then off to full council in the middle of February. So again, thank you everybody for coming out and for voicing all of your your concerns and ideas, and much appreciated. I have just one procedural motion I have to do. At the Budget Subcommittee for City Hall, Scarborough Civic Centre, and North York Civic Centre consultations received for information the public presentations and the communications submitted by members of the public. All in favour?
I just realized I could vote against and it would fail on a tie.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. We couldn't end the session, so anyway, that carries. Thank you. The meeting's adjourned, and thank you everybody for coming.